Kenichi stares at the blade in his hand, a weapon he pulled from the refuse of this world. He marvels at its sharpness, questioning how something discarded as junk could cut so effortlessly. It is a stark contrast to the humble skill he was granted upon arriving in this strange land, the ability to collect what others have thrown away. Nearby, Liisa grips her staff, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and trepidation as she observes the weapon. She wonders aloud who would ever discard such a lethal instrument, its presence feeling far too dangerous for mere pile of scrap. This moment of discovery is a far cry from the cold dismissal he faced earlier. Hirotaka, the celebrated hero, sat relaxed in a tavern, his voice devoid of empathy as he delivered the ultimatum. Kenichi was fired and had to leave the party immediately. The shock of the expulsion left him speechless, his mind racing to process the sudden betrayal. He stood trembling before the rest of the group, struggling to find words as Hirotaka continued his verbal assault. The hero made it clear that they had no room for a useless person in their ranks, his words cutting deeper than any blade. It had been 6 months since the 7 of them were summoned to this world, gifted with heavenly skills to defeat the Demon King. They had built a reputation as legendary heroes, but the unity they once shared had clearly fractured. As he stood alone in the crowded hall, the whispers of onlookers began to sting. They mocked the idea of someone like him being part of the hero's elite circle, their laughter echoing his own growing sense of isolation. Hirotaka's mockery reached a crescendo as he openly ridiculed Kenichi's unique ability. He laughed at the garbage-picking skill, treating it as a pathetic joke rather than a gift from heavens. Despite the humiliation, he reached out his hand, a familiar glow beginning to emanate from his palm. The air shimmered with magical energy as his skill activated, manifesting a small, glass vial out of thin air. He looked down at the modest prize, a simple bottle retrieved by his junk collection skill. It was a power that triggered every 12 hours, pulling a random, discarded item from across the world into his grasp, a humble talent that his former allies had deemed worthless. He holds up a small glass vial, his eyes bright with a rare moment of success as he identifies the liquid inside as a high-quality potion retrieved through his unique skill. But the celebratory mood is shattered when a heavy fist slams onto the wooden table, followed by a chorus of mocking laughter from the other adventurers who find the act of scavenging for junk to be pathetic. Hirotaka sneers at the discovery, dismissing the find as mere pocket change and labeling the young man a useless burden with no combat prowess to offer the party. He questions how such a minor item could ever be considered a good find compared to their grand mission. The youth tries to defend his dignity, shouting that he's only 17 years old and not the old man they claim. But the blonde warrior only laughs harder. He mocks the idea of a grown man being cared for by younger, more capable heroes, stating he would die of embarrassment if he were in such a position. The verbal abuse escalates into a formal expulsion, with the party members hurling insults and demanding he leave their sight immediately. They call him a disgrace to the hero's name and tell him to go eat garbage elsewhere. Realizing the bridge is burned, he decides he has had enough of their arrogance and agrees to leave. As he prepares to depart, Hirotaka demands he surrender the equipment he supposedly lent him. The young man silently notes that he actually purchased those items with his own hard-earned coins, but he resolves to return them anyway, just to sever all ties. The warrior offers one last condescending remark, leaving the youth standing in a heavy silence, his face obscured by the shadow of his own frustration and the weight of the betrayal. Moments later, he is shoved toward the exit, desperately clutching the sacks of scavenged items he refuses to abandon. He shouts back that no matter what they say, he will never hand over the junk he has worked so hard to collect. The heavy doors swing shut as he is unceremoniously tossed into the street, landing hard on the stone steps. He picks himself up and roars a final truth at the closed door, that they are nothing but frauds who have forgotten their mission to defeat the Demon King in favor of a life of luxury. Inside the warm tavern, the sounds of revelry and clinking mugs continue unabated, the heroes laughing at their former comrades' expense while he stands alone in the cold night air. He sat slumped on the cold floor of the guild hall, the weight of his expulsion pressing down on him. With a bitter smile, he scratched the back of his head, forced to admit that perhaps his former companions were right about his lack of utility in their eyes. This feeling of being discarded was all too familiar, echoing his previous life as a junk collector. He remembered the routine of clearing out unwanted memories, like the time a woman handed over a worn stuffed bear, her daughter watching sadly as it was added to the pile of things no longer needed. The child had clung to that toy, a silent witness to the cold reality that in any world, things and people are often thrown away once they've served their purpose. As he drove the truck away, the sight of her small, grieving figure remained etched in his mind. He wondered if it was strange to feel such a profound sense of loneliness, even after all this time. The silence of the empty hall seemed to amplify his isolation, leaving him with nothing but his thoughts. Now, he found himself truly alone in a foreign world, abandoned by those he had traveled with. Sitting on the cobblestones of a quiet street, he stared into the darkness, questioning what his next move could possibly be. Despite the dire situation, he wasn't entirely empty-handed, though his only possessions were the scraps of junk he had managed to keep. With his equipment confiscated and his pockets empty of coin, he clutched the small bag of salvaged items as if it were a lifeline. A faint, defiant smile touched his lips as he considered the absurdity of his predicament. He refused to let the despair consume him, finding a strange sort of humor in the fact that he was back to square one, relying on the very trade he thought he had left behind. There was no point in dwelling on the past or the betrayal he had suffered. It was time to rely on the one thing he truly knew, the skills of a former junk collector, ready to see what value could be found in the discarded remnants of this world. He spread his meager findings across the stone floor, meticulously examining each piece of scrap. Among the rusted metal and worn fabric, he began to analyze the structures and materials, his eyes searching for a hidden potential that others would overlook. His attention was drawn to a piece of weathered armor, its surface etched with the marks of countless battles. He marveled at the history it must have witnessed, wondering about the adventurer who had once worn it and what stories it could tell if only it could speak. He examines the blood-stained gauntlet, noting that even if it's discarded and old, the history of those who used it remains etched into the metal. Resting atop his salvaged treasures under the starlit sky, he reflects on the ridicule he faced from others. Despite their mockery, he feels a quiet gratitude for his unique skill, finding beauty in the stories hidden within every piece of junk. Seeking to turn his labor into profit, he steps into a local shop, his arms laden with heavy bags. He politely announces his intent to sell the items he has gathered. The merchant looks on with skepticism, dismissing the haul as mere trash, which sparks a passionate defense from the young man. He argues that labeling something as garbage is simply a failure of imagination and a sign of deep-seated prejudice, insisting that such fixed ideas prevent one from seeing true value. Intrigued by the outburst, the shopkeeper begins to inspect the contents, discovering that the armor has been meticulously disassembled into its base materials. He acknowledges the strength and specialized knowledge required for such a task, while the youth explains his practical reasoning, noting that it would be easier to reuse the materials in this form. The burly man offers a rare word of praise, impressed by such meticulousness in one so young. The boy can only offer a sheepish laugh in return, secretly amused by the fact that his mind is actually that of a 32-year-old man. When a merchant offers 6 silver coins for the lot, a wave of relief and joy washes over the boy. He accepts the payment with a beaming smile, expressing his sincere gratitude for the fair trade. Stepping back out into the sun-drenched streets of the town, he feels a newfound sense of purpose. The bustling atmosphere of the market square seems more welcoming than ever before. As he surveys the vibrant world around him, he realizes that continuing his life as a junk collector here might not be such a bad fate after all. A wide, genuine grin spreads across his face at the prospect of a life free from soul-crushing quotas and overbearing bosses. He feels a surge of confidence, sensing that in this new life, he might truly excel at his craft. He stares blankly, the initial rush of his small success fading into a sobering realization. Crouching amidst the undergrowth, he acknowledges the harsh reality. Junk collection alone won't sustain him. The limitation of his unique skill, a grueling 12-hour cooldown, is a significant hurdle he hadn't fully accounted for. Deciding to supplement his income by foraging for medicinal herbs, he continues to dwell on the inefficiency of his power. Not only is the wait time excessive, but the items he retrieves are entirely random, often yielding nothing but literal trash. A sudden rustle in the nearby foliage breaks his train of thought. As he peers into the brush, a wave of self-doubt washes over him, making him wonder if he is as disposable as the junk he collects. His eyes widen at the sight of a small, seemingly harmless rodent, but the moment of charm is fleeting. From the shadows, a swarm of massive, predatory rats emerges, their bared teeth and glowing eyes signaling a lethal intent. Terrified, he bolts through the forest, the pack of monsters hot on his heels. The realization hits him hard. In his previous life, he had always relied on others to do the fighting, and he had dangerously underestimated the lethality of this new world. Breathless and cornered, he frantically searches for a way out. Being completely unarmed against such a relentless pursuit leaves him with a cold sense of dread. Just as despair begins to take hold, he realizes that the necessary time has finally elapsed. With a desperate cry for any kind of weapon, he thrusts his hand forward, activating his junk collection skill at the precise moment the cooldown ends. Dark, ethereal energy erupts from the ground, swirling violently as something begins to take shape from the void. He watches in stunned silence as the skill responds to his dire need. Reaching into the dissipating shadows, he firmly grasps the hilt of a jagged, dark-bladed dagger. Though it is a discarded relic, the weight of the weapon in his hand offers a sudden, sharp glimmer of hope against the approaching horde. He stares in disbelief, his eyes wide as he processes the sudden appearance of the weapon in his hand. Before he can even test the blade's weight, the pack of giant rats lunges from the shadows with a collective, piercing shriek. Driven by pure instinct, the young man swings the jagged blade in a wide arc, and to his astonishment, it carves through the monster's thick hides as if they were nothing more than mist. As the last of the creatures falls silent, he stands amidst the remains, the forest suddenly quiet once more. A wave of relief washes over him, and he breathes out a shaky sigh, realizing he has survived the encounter. He turns his attention to the weapon that saved him, noting its dark, serrated edge and the strange, almost organic design of its hilt. It is a piece of discarded junk, yet its lethality is undeniable. Looking closely at the intricate, I like carving on the handle. He whispers a word of thanks to the inanimate object, acknowledging it as his unexpected savior. The practical reality of his situation soon sets in, and he begins to gather the remains, realizing that these monster materials could be sold for a significant profit at the guild. His moment of triumph is cut short by a high-pitched scream echoing through the trees, causing him to spin around in alarm. Realizing that someone else is in grave danger, the boy's first instinct is to find help, his mind racing with the urgent need to find an adult or a seasoned adventurer. He comes to a startling realization. In this moment of crisis, there is no one else to call upon, for he is the adult who must take charge. He follows the sound of the desperate cries and discovers a young cleric cornered by a hulking, cyclopean bear. She stands her ground with a trembling staff, her voice cracking as she commands the beast to stay back, yet the massive predator only looms closer, its single eye fixed on its prey. Liisa stands her ground, her voice trembling as she warns the beast not to take another step, threatening it with magic she barely commands. Before the one-eyed bear can strike, a blur of motion interrupts the slaughter. Kenichi throws himself into the fray, his body a living projectile that slams into the creature's side, momentarily halting its advance. He looks back at her with a grin of pure relief, his breath hitching as he celebrates his timely arrival. The young cleric can only stare in stunned silence, her wide eyes reflecting the impossibility of this sudden rescue. The moment of triumph is fleeting, as the massive beast lashes out with a roar of fury. The force of the blow sends the young man spiraling through the air, his body crashing through the underbrush with a sickening thud. As he lies sprawled on the forest floor, the sheer scale of the monster becomes terrifyingly clear. He groans, the pain radiating through his limbs, and realizes with a jolt of fear that if a mere mouse in this world was deadly, a creature of this magnitude is a death sentence. Having dealt with the nuisance, the cyclopean predator turns its singular, glowing gaze back toward its original prey. It lumbers forward, each heavy footfall shaking the earth, while the girl stands paralyzed, her staff clutched tightly in her trembling hands. She watches the shadow of the beast loom over her, her mind a whirlwind of panic and indecision. Nearby, struggling to regain his footing, the fallen scavenger watches the scene unfold with desperation, knowing he must act before it is too late. Her composure shatters completely as the monster nears, her breathing coming in ragged, shallow gasps. She begins to stammer a plea for mercy, her staff rattling against the ground as her strength fails her. In the depths of her terror, memories of those she left behind surface like ghosts. She sees the faces of her teacher and her grandfather, her heart heavy with the weight of her perceived failures as a disciple who can never seem to master her craft when the stakes are highest. Tears well in her eyes as the crushing realization of her own helplessness takes hold. She feels a profound sense of guilt for dragging a stranger into her certain doom, her self-loathing reaching a peak as she prepares for the end. A calm voice cuts through her despair, assuring her that everything will be all right. Reinvigorated, the young man rises and charges once more, his metal-clad fist glowing with intent as he warns the beast not to underestimate the strength forged through years of grueling labor. He lunges forward, fueled by a surge of adrenaline and indignation, shouting a challenge at the beast for its earlier assault. His blade arcs through the air, aiming for the creature's thick hide with every ounce of his newfound strength. In response, the massive beast lets out a deafening roar, its powerful limbs sweeping through the air with lethal intent. He barely manages to evade the crushing blow, clicking his tongue in frustration as he realizes his current approach is failing against such overwhelming power. Despite his efforts, the strike he manages to land is far too shallow to be decisive. He realizes that with only a small knife, he is at a severe disadvantage. Defeating such a titan would require a grueling war of attrition he might not survive, as every shallow cut barely grazes the monster's vitality. Looking down at his weapon, he notices a strange, organic eye embedded in the hilt blinking back at him. A desperate thought crosses his mind. If only the blade had more reach, he might stand a chance against the towering predator. As if responding to his silent plea, the short blade begins to shift and elongate, transforming into a full-length sword before his very eyes. He stares in disbelief, his mouth agape at the impossible evolution of the junk he had salvaged from the waste. The one-eyed bear lunges again, its maw wide and dripping with saliva, but his attention is momentarily captured by the sword's hilt, which now sports multiple unsettling eyes. He wonders if this is even a sword at all, or something far more alien and alive. With a sudden, instinctive motion, he brings the new blade down in a powerful vertical arc. The air itself seems to whistle as the edge bites deep into the creature's fur, cutting through resistance as if it were mere smoke. The force of the blow is absolute, carving through the monster's massive frame with terrifying ease. He stands frozen as the two halves of the beast begin to slide apart, the battle ending in a single, silent heartbeat. Nearby, Liisa watches in stunned silence, her voice barely a whisper as she marvels at the feat. He can only stare at the remains of his foe, his mind struggling to reconcile the power he just unleashed with the simple scavenger he used to be. He gazes at the severed halves of the bear, the reality of the situation finally sinking in. A single stroke was all it took to end the life of a creature that had nearly killed them both, leaving him to wonder what kind of weapon he truly holds. He stares at the weapon, sweat beading on his brow as he realizes the sheer danger of the object in his hands. The blade's organic eyes seem to fixate on him, shifting and blinking with a life of their own, adapting its form to his grip with unsettling precision. Despite the initial dread, a sense of wonder takes hold as he examines the intricate details of the living blade. His fear quickly gives way to a boyish excitement, and he can't help but dash through the clearing, brandishing the weapon with a wide grin while the young cleric watches from a distance. This moment of joy is short-lived, however, as the sword suddenly erupts in a thick, roiling cloud of dark energy. He recoils, his eyes widening in alarm as the shadowy mist consumes the blade, masking its true form once more. As the darkness dissipates, the massive sword has vanished, leaving only the small, rusted knife in his hand. He stares at the humble tool, confused by the cryptic name Osuro that seems to echo in his mind, accompanied by a flurry of ancient script that hints at the weapon's dark nature. Shaking off the confusion, he turns to the young woman he rescued, offering a sincere apology for the danger he brought upon her. She, however, is quick to express her gratitude, her voice soft as she offers to use her healing magic to tend to the scrapes and bruises he sustained during the fight. She takes a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she begins the incantation, calling upon the Holy Mother for aid. He watches intently, but the words seem to catch in her throat, her focus wavering as she stumbles through the complex syllables of the spell. The attempt ends in a sharp, painful hiss as she accidentally bites her tongue mid-chant. Her eyes squeeze shut in frustration and pain, the magical energy she had managed to gather flickering out instantly. Overwhelmed by her failure, she collapses into a fit of tears, burying her face in her hands as she laments her own perceived uselessness. He stands by awkwardly, trying to offer words of comfort as she wails about her inability to perform even the simplest of tasks. Through her sobs, she confesses the depth of her insecurity, claiming that a cleric who cannot heal is worth less than a common potion. The pressure of performing in front of others causes her to freeze, her nerves shattering any hope of a successful incantation. A heavy silence falls over the forest as they stand together in the clearing, the weight of her confession hanging in the air between them. She hangs her head in shame, her spirit crushed by her previous failure. Kenichi acknowledges her confession with a quiet, thoughtful tone, absorbing the weight of her struggle. Suddenly, he leans forward, his face inches from hers, catching her completely off guard. With a determined look in his eyes, he makes an unexpected request, asking her to attempt the healing magic on him one more time, despite her fears. As she stammers in confusion, he gently explains his theory, suggesting that her anxiety stems from a deep-seated desire to be helpful and live up to the expectations of others. The realization hits her hard, leaving her momentarily speechless as he continues to dismantle the self-blame that has been holding her back. He stands before her, expressing genuine gratitude for the concern she showed regarding his well-being. To him, the mere fact that she cared enough to worry about his injuries is a more potent and meaningful remedy than any spell could ever provide. With a reassuring smile, he urges her to try once more, emphasizing that failure is perfectly acceptable and that he won't judge her. This unconditional support causes her eyes to widen in disbelief. The pressure that usually suffocates her begins to lift, replaced by a burgeoning sense of hope. She grips her wooden staff tightly, her knuckles whitening as she prepares herself. Looking at his encouraging expression, she realizes that no one has ever offered her such kindness or understanding before, and the thought strengthens her resolve to succeed. Closing her eyes, she begins the sacred incantation, her voice steadying as she calls upon the source of her mana. She prays for the pure light of the merciful Holy Mother, Chakra, to manifest through her and grant her the power to heal. Her focus narrows entirely onto the task at hand, her lips moving with precision as she completes the prayer. She pleads for the divine power to take away the pain and mend the wounds of the person standing before her, pouring all her intent into the words. A brilliant, warm radiance suddenly erupts from her staff, bathing the forest clearing in light. He watches in awe as the magical energy flows over his hand, the glow signifying that the spell has finally taken hold. He marvels at the result, running a hand over his now pristine skin, which feels smoother than ever before. Beside him, she stands in a state of pure shock, her hands trembling as the reality of her success finally sinks in. He beams with pride, praising her for the successful spell and reminding her that she is capable when she truly tries. In a burst of shared joy, they exchange a high five, their laughter echoing through the woods as the weight of her previous failures finally lifts. Watching her smile, he finds her genuine happiness endearing and decides it is finally time to properly introduce themselves, politely asking for her name. She shyly reveals her name is Liisa, and in return, he introduces himself as Hirotaka, marking the official beginning of their partnership under the dappled sunlight of the forest. Her eyes widen in sudden realization as she notices the weapon at his hip, stammering out a question about whether he is truly the master of a legendary demon sword. He tries to downplay it, explaining that while it is called Osoro and is technically junk, it has proven to be surprisingly reliable. He is left momentarily stunned by her intense reaction, only just learning that in this world, possession of such a blade is the definitive proof of one's status as a demon king. Far away, nestled among jagged peaks, a dark and foreboding fortress looms. Within the cold stone walls of the castle, a tense confrontation unfolds as a mocking voice taunts the master of the keep, questioning how a supposed ruler could have possibly lost his most precious weapon. The demon king stands tall, his silhouette imposing against the dim light, radiating a cold fury that terrifies those beneath him as the shame of his loss is laid bare. He rants about the inherent pride and strength required of their kind, declaring that a weakling who allows their sword to be stolen is no king at all, before issuing a final, booming command to retrieve the lost blade. The silence of the mountain is shattered by a scream as a figure is violently cast out from the high battlements, followed by a roar of derision, labeling the disgraced ruler a mere garbage demon king. He hurtles through the sky, his voice trailing off as he demands to know who dared to steal his demon sword, Osoro. As he plummets, his initial rage gives way to a weary resignation, muttering about how much of a bother the entire ordeal has become. Meanwhile, another presence stirs. A young woman with sharp horns and a lethargic gaze looks on, her eyes heavy with boredom, but her words carrying a chilling weight. She declares with flat, murderous intent that she will kill whoever is responsible, highlighting that while Hirotaka remains carefree elsewhere, the other demon kings are far from peaceful. Kenichi and Liisa walk through the cobblestone streets of the town as she tries to wrap her head around his revelation. She finds it hard to believe that his junk collection skill led him to such a powerful artifact, though it does explain why the hero Hirotaka couldn't possibly be the demon king. She continues her train of thought, her expression softening as the logic of the situation becomes clear. The realization that they aren't following a hidden enemy brings a small, fleeting sense of relief to her troubled mind. Kenichi, however, lingers on the title itself, whispering the words Demon King as the true weight of the term begins to sink in. This prompts a memory of the moment they were first brought to this world, when a booming voice echoed directly into their minds. They were told they were summoned for a singular purpose, to defeat the 7 demon kings who were tearing the very fabric of the world's order apart. He looks at his companion, questioning if these beings are truly as evil as the legend suggests. She responds with a grim warning, explaining that they are far beyond simple villains. They are catastrophic forces, one of whom once completely obliterated an entire nation. He considers his own situation, thinking that perhaps being exiled was a blessing in disguise. He realizes that the magic sword he carries is the definitive proof of a demon king's status, a vessel for overwhelming power that can only be obtained through a dark contract. Liisa watches him closely, her concern growing as she asks what he intends to do with such a dangerous weapon. She is haunted by the knowledge that those who wield these blades are often consumed by a hunger for power that promises to satisfy their every desire. He stares down at the small, rusted knife in his hand, which looks nothing like the terrifying weapons of myth. Despite its humble appearance, he feels a strange sense of potential, realizing that with this companion, he might finally have the power to do anything. With a determined smile, he holds the blade aloft. He makes his choice clear, declaring his intention to look after the sentient weapon as a true partner. She is taken aback by his resolve, her eyes widening in surprise at his empathy for the blade. He explains his reasoning simply. When he was cast out and completely alone, this junk was the only thing that stood by him and saved his life twice. She watches as the young man holds the rusted blade aloft, his voice ringing with a newfound resolve. He declares that the sentient weapon is already his partner, and he intends to take full responsibility for its care. This display of compassion leaves her momentarily speechless, her gaze lingering on him as she processes his words. Within her mind, a shift occurs. She realizes that he is fundamentally changing her understanding of the world. To her, he is an extraordinary person, one capable of redeeming a terrifying weapon that had only ever been associated with malice and destruction. Seeking to prove her own worth, she explains that she possesses healing magic and a vast wealth of knowledge passed down by her mentor. With her heart racing and her face flushed, she finally musters the courage to ask if she might join him on his journey as a true companion. Overwhelmed by the moment, she cries out with desperate intensity, promising to do absolutely anything he asks of her. Her dramatic offer is met with an immediate and blunt refusal, leaving her stunned as he flatly rejects the notion of such a one-sided arrangement. He clarifies his stance, explaining that the very idea of doing anything is wrong, as companions are meant to support one another equally. He insists that she must rely on him just as much as he relies on her, even as he humbly admits to his own lack of a powerful skill and his current status as an unemployed wanderer. He reaches out his hand, offering a partnership based on mutual trust rather than servitude. A gentle smile touches her lips as she realizes the true nature of his power. His ability to find value in what others have discarded is, in her eyes, the most wonderful skill of all. She expressed her gratitude, her voice soft with sincerity, but the moment of quiet reflection was abruptly shattered. A pair of small, energetic hands suddenly clamped onto Kenichi's arm, catching him completely off guard. The source of the intrusion was a beastkin girl with wide, sparkling eyes behind round spectacles, who seemed to have materialized out of thin air. She let out a cry of pure delight upon hearing that he was currently without a trade, her excitement bordering on manic. Before he could even process her sudden appearance, she lunged forward, seizing him with a grip that defied her small stature. With a triumphant shout, she began to haul him away, leaving Liisa standing in stunned silence. The young man was dragged unceremoniously through the cobblestone streets, his heels scraping against the ground as he struggled to keep up with her relentless pace. They eventually skidded to a halt in front of a modest wooden structure, where he collapsed in a heap, gasping for breath. Standing proudly before the building, she introduced herself as Rona, the multi-talented heart of the White Cat's Mistletoe Guild. With a flourish and a membership form in hand, she practically begged him to sign up, pitching the life of an adventurer as the perfect solution to his unemployment. This establishment functioned as a hub for those seeking to earn a living by taking on various tasks, from recovering lost items to hunting dangerous monsters. It was a place where the desperate and the brave alike could find a purpose. As they stepped through the heavy wooden doors, the interior was revealed to be surprisingly spacious, yet eerily quiet. Kenichi looked around the rustic hall, noting the lack of activity that one would expect from a bustling guild. He couldn't help but point out the obvious vacancy, questioning if they actually received any requests at all. Rona's cheerful facade faltered for a split second as she admitted that while they didn't exactly have droves of visitors, they were certainly ready for them. Sensing his hesitation, she quickly sweetened the deal, offering him a place to stay on the second floor if he agreed to register immediately. The prospect of a roof over his head was a tempting lure for someone who had been wandering the wilds. She boasted about the abundance of spare rooms, though her pride was somewhat undercut by the admission that the vacancy was due to a total lack of other members. Kenichi could only stare in disbelief, wondering if he was about to join a sinking ship. She watches as the young man finally gives his consent to join the guild. Kenichi's decision is sudden but firm, catching her by surprise. In response, the receptionist's emotions swing wildly from shock to dramatic despair. When he comments on her overwhelming energy, she breaks into theatrical sobs, lamenting his bluntness while calling him a heartless vagabond. Meanwhile, the young cleric stands nearby, her eyes wide with disbelief. She questions his sanity for choosing such a dilapidated establishment, only for him to remind her that she was the one who brought him here in the first place. He takes a moment to survey the quiet hall. Though the building is clearly past its prime, the interior is well-maintained and spotless, offering a sense of stability and a roof over his head that he desperately needs. With a gentle smile, he explains his true reasoning. He has seen how much this place means to the receptionist and recognizes the sincerity in her desperate search for new members. This admission leaves the beastkin woman momentarily speechless. She stares at him, her glasses reflecting the light as she processes the idea that someone would join simply because they valued her dedication. Overcome with gratitude, she beams at him, her previous theatrics replaced by a genuine, joyful thank you. Beside them, the cleric remains slightly bewildered by the sudden shift in atmosphere. However, her gratitude quickly turns into a fierce, almost manic warning. She makes it clear that there is no turning back now, jokingly threatening to ruin his reputation with embarrassing drawings if he ever tries to desert them. Once the paperwork is finalized, the official registration process is declared complete. As the cleric yields to his decision, the receptionist pauses, a flicker of recognition crossing her mind as she looks at the name he provided. The newly issued membership card rests in his hand, officially identifying him to the world as Hirotaka Hirota. He gazes down at the official document, a small, satisfied smile playing on his lips as the reality of his new status as an adventurer finally begins to sink in. His excitement boils over, and he pumps his fist with a grin, though he is quick to mentally credit his success to the support of his companions, the living blade, and the young cleric standing nearby. Meanwhile, the receptionist's eyes widen behind her glasses as she reviews the other registration form, recognizing the prestigious surname Montaigne and the rare blessing of chakra skill listed upon it. She cannot contain her shock, blurting out the girl's full title as the daughter of the local lord, prompting a panicked Liisa to leap forward and desperately try to silence the outburst. Trembling with anxiety, the young noblewoman pleads for discretion, insisting that she is merely a trainee cleric on a humble journey of self-improvement. The receptionist eventually relents, promising to keep the girl's highborn identity a secret within the guild's walls, much to the relief of the flustered cleric. However, a calculating glint enters the beastkin's eyes as she imagines the potential political favors or guild donations she might secure by befriending such a prominent figure, while the young man watches her sudden change in demeanor with growing suspicion. Shaking off her private schemes, she turns back to the pair with renewed professional vigor, inquiring what name they have chosen for their newly formed adventuring party. She goes on to explain that most groups select a title that embodies their core principles or unique traits, illustrating her point with examples of parties driven by a blatant and singular desire for coin. Considering their own goals, the young man suggests a name that reflects a desire for a healthy work-life balance, specifically requesting 3 days off a week, a notion the receptionist seems surprisingly eager to support. He waits patiently as Liisa stands in a contemplative silence, her mind seemingly filled with abstract thoughts of labor rights and fair treatment. perhaps a reflection of her own internal struggles with her perceived worth and the pressures of her noble lineage. Because of this quiet moment of reflection, she begins to open up, recalling how Hirotaka once told her it was acceptable to fail. This kindness made her feel that even someone she considers useless could strive for more, leading her to timidly propose a name for their new group, the Junketeers. As the name hangs in the air, he repeats it slowly, causing her to immediately spiral into a fit of embarrassment. She waves her hands frantically, begging him to disregard the suggestion as her face flushes a deep crimson, mortified by her own creative choice. In response to her outburst, he breaks into a wide, genuine grin and declares the name perfect. With a surge of energy, he officially announces the formation of the Junketeers as a new party within the White Cat's Mistletoe Guild, much to her stunned surprise. He follows this with a confident thumbs up, urging her to join him in showing the world their junk spirit. The encouragement strikes a chord within her, and her eyes widen with a newfound sense of hope and shared determination. Meanwhile, the receptionist, Karuta, is swept up in her own fervor, shouting about how the guild's very future rests on the shoulders of the man she believes to be Hirotaka. He quickly tries to temper her expectations, insisting that such a heavy burden shouldn't be placed solely on him. Despite the chaotic energy of the guild hall, he remains focused on the practicalities, reminding his new partner that they have living expenses to cover. With a determined fist pump, he resolves to tackle their upcoming requests with everything they've got, while Karuta continues her enthusiastic cheering in the background. The sun rises over the jagged peaks, casting a golden glow over the valley as a new day begins with a call to action. Inside the modest wooden building, Kenichi turns to his companions, Liisa and Karuta, suggesting they begin their daily routine. With a confident smirk, he extends his hand, calling upon his unique ability to manifest objects from the ether. Karuta watches with wide-eyed fascination, her glasses reflecting the light as she recalls the unusual skill listed in the official records. She admits she has never encountered anything like it. While Liisa looks on with a mix of awe and curiosity, he remains focused, his anticipation building as he considers the possibility of obtaining something truly legendary this time. Because of his concentration, a shimmering light begins to coalesce in the air before them, signaling the arrival of a new item. The light fades, leaving him holding a delicate, frilled garment that is clearly not the legendary treasure he had hoped for. His expression shifts from triumph to utter bewilderment. In response to the unexpected arrival, the girls recoil in shock and embarrassment, their faces flushing as they process the sight. He frantically tries to defend himself, insisting that the manifestation was entirely beyond his conscious control. Moments later, the tension is interrupted as a second object, a weathered piece of parchment, drifts slowly down from the ceiling. As the paper settles on the floor, the trio gathers around it, their previous embarrassment momentarily forgotten in favor of this new mystery. Upon closer inspection, he realizes that the parchment is far more than just scrap. It appears to be a detailed map leading to hidden riches. He leans in as Liisa unfurls the weathered parchment, her eyes wide with excitement. She explains that the markings correspond to the region surrounding a legendary site, the tomb of the renowned magician Kain, located deep within Eureka Valley. With a trembling finger, she points to a specific inscription that promises treasure hidden within the ancient stone. The prospect of such a find sends his imagination racing, envisioning a heavy wooden chest overflowing with gold coins and glittering jewels. The mere thought of such wealth leaves him momentarily breathless, his eyes sparkling with the same greed that has driven many an adventurer before him. Because of this vision, he insists they investigate immediately, ignoring Karut's frantic reminders about their outstanding guild obligations. He counters her concerns by suggesting that a successful treasure hunt would do more to elevate the guild's reputation than any mundane quest ever could, leaving the receptionist stammering in disbelief. Seeing his resolve, she eventually relents, though her expression remains clouded with worry. She offers a stern, if somewhat contradictory, warning for him to prioritize his own safety above all else, even as they pursue a goal that could very well put him in harm's way. Meanwhile, Lisa's gaze lingers on the dark, irregular stains marring the map's surface, her voice dropping to a concerned whisper. She notes that these marks are likely blood, suggesting the previous owner met a violent end, and she wonders aloud if they are truly prepared for the monsters that surely guard Kain's final resting place. In response, he remains undeterred, placing his trust in the combined strength of his sentient blade and Lisa's magical support. He assures her that they will proceed with caution, promising to retreat the moment the situation becomes too perilous for them to handle. With the decision finalized, he raises a fist in a gesture of triumph, his spirit undampened by the potential dangers ahead. He declares their new objective with a roar of enthusiasm, ready to traverse the wilds of Eureka Valley to reach the mysterious tomb. Moments later, the group reaches their destination, and the sheer scale of the sight leaves them both speechless. The sight that greets them is far more imposing than any simple grave they had imagined. Before them stands a colossal stone edifice, its grand arches and weathered pillars suggesting a fortress rather than a mere burial chamber. It is a magnificent ruin that seems to hum with the weight of centuries, promising both great danger and even greater rewards for those brave enough to enter. As they prepare to step inside, He takes a moment to adjust his gear, revealing a new, custom-made leather scabbard for his magic sword. He explains that he had it specially crafted at a local tool shop, believing it far better to have the sentient weapon secured and ready at his hip than tucked away in a storage sack. He laughs, noticing the excitement of his sentient blade as they venture deeper into the tomb, the metallic clinking of his gear echoing in the silence. Beside him, a monstrous skeletal figure looms, its skull adorned with horns and sharp teeth, yet he remains unfazed, his smile wide as he faces the danger head-on. The creature, a massive skeleton, prepares to strike as the group moves through the dark corridor, its hollow sockets fixed on the intruders. In response to the sudden threat, Liisa screams in terror at the sight of the human bones, her voice echoing through the chamber. While she panics at the thought of a ghost, he remains remarkably calm, noting that it is merely a monster and no time to lose one's composure. With a sudden, violent motion, the skeleton is shattered into pieces, its bones scattering across the stone floor in a chaotic heap. As the dust settles, she breathes a sigh of relief, praising his prowess and expressing her amazement at how quickly the threat was neutralized. He, however, seems more focused on the aftermath of the encounter, noting how easily the skeleton was destroyed. Moments later, he notices a strange, dark mist rising from the remains, a mental notification of a new skill acquisition appearing before him. The realization that his blade has absorbed something from the fallen foe causes him to pause in thought. Observing his reaction, she looks on in confusion as he examines the new ability, Undead attribute bestowal. She admits she has never heard of such a skill, and from the name alone, it sounds as though it transforms the target into an undead creature. He questions the utility of such a power, wondering aloud what the point would be in deliberately making enemies undead. While he doubts they will have much use for it, the mystery of the skill's origin lingers as he considers the strange logic of the tomb's magic. Meanwhile, the sentient weapon pulses with a dark energy, its organic eye widening as it acknowledges his perceptiveness. It reveals that another aspect of its power has awakened, the longsword form, a more formidable shape for the battles ahead. The blade had transformed into a formidable longsword, its jagged edge and skull-adorned hilt radiating a dark, new-found power. Kenichi gripped the weapon, his eyes wide with astonishment at the sheer weight and presence of the evolved tool. As he tested its balance with a few experimental swings, Liisa marveled at its sudden growth, noting how much stronger it appeared. The young man, feeling the strain on his arms, silently considered that he might need to increase his own physical strength to match the weapon's increasing scale. Their moment of wonder was abruptly shattered by a cold, menacing voice echoing through the tomb. A hand began to glow with a volatile magical energy as a figure stepped forward, declaring with chilling certainty that they would all be reduced to ashes right then and there. She cried out a warning, sensing the immense danger radiating from the approaching light of magic. He tensed, his grip tightening on Osoro as he realized that their victory over the skeleton had only drawn out a far more dangerous adversary. Emerging from the shadows was a woman of striking appearance, her long dark hair flowing as she commanded them to surrender. She identified herself as the Demon King of Sloth, her presence commanding and her lack of traditional attire doing little to diminish the overwhelming aura of authority and power that left both companions frozen in shock. A mysterious woman stands before the group, her voice booming as she commands the Demon King of Sloth to surrender. Kenichi and Liisa exchange a bewildered glance, unsure of where to even begin with such an absurd accusation. Ignoring their confusion, she demands they allow her to introduce herself properly as she stands tall in the stone corridor, radiating an air of self-importance. She declares her name is Rachel, an elf on a righteous quest to find and vanquish the Demon King. Her gaze suddenly fixes on the jagged, living blade in Kenichi's hand, and she concludes that such a cursed weapon could only belong to the Dark Lord himself. The sudden accusation sends a jolt of fear through the young adventurers as they realize she is serious. He frantically reaches for his belt, pulling out his official guild identification to prove they are merely novice adventurers and not the monster she seeks. The elf pays no heed to his plea, instead raising her hand to the heavens and invoking the great fire spirit, Salamandal, to manifest a crimson spear of mana. Liisa watches in horror, her breath catching as she recognizes the complexity of the high-level incantation while a massive sphere of flame begins to churn violently above them. With the spell fully formed, Rachel prepares to unleash its fury, vowing to annihilate the foolish attackers who stand in her path. But just as the tension reaches its peak, the elf suddenly crumples to the stone floor with a pathetic thud, her grand magic dissipating into nothingness. She lies there completely drained, whimpering about her intense hunger and her inability to move another inch. Kenichi and Liisa can only stare down at their supposed executioner, the threat having vanished as quickly as it appeared. She sits on the ground, clutching a piece of bread with both hands, her expression softened by gratitude. She offers a sincere apology for her earlier hostility, admitting she hadn't realized they were fellow adventurers. Because of her sudden change in demeanor, Kenichi grumbles that she should have clarified her identity sooner to avoid the conflict. She snaps back, insisting she had already tried to tell him, though her words had clearly fallen on deaf ears during the heat of battle. As she continues to eat, the young man questions her about her quest to defeat the Demon King. She explains that while her search for a legendary magic sword was successful, the Demon King she sought was nowhere to be found. Her expression turns grim as she describes the immeasurable suffering and destruction wrought upon the world. She speaks with a heavy sense of duty, declaring that someone must step forward to end the chaos. Hearing the title of the Demon King mentioned again causes Kenichi to pause, his mind racing as he tries to connect the pieces of this unfolding mystery. Meanwhile, the elf's focus returns entirely to her meal, as she begins devouring the supplies with a ferocity that leaves the young man staring in disbelief. He can't help but wonder just how much one person can possibly eat. Moments later, he is left holding his empty bag, devastated to find that she has polished off every single one of the special snacks he had been carefully rationing for himself. Seeing his distress, Liisa explains that for a magician of such caliber, food is more than just sustenance. It is the fuel required to replenish a massive well of mana. She notes that the sheer volume of her appetite is a testament to the incredible power she possesses. The elf confirms this with a confident smirk, explaining that her vast mana reserves are a trait of her heritage. She reveals she hails from the same homeland as the legendary magician Can, though she quickly clarifies to a stunned Liisa that they share no blood relation. Curious about her background, Kenichi asks why she is traveling alone if she is indeed an adventurer. She casually mentions her status as a former S-rank adventurer, a revelation that only serves to further irritate him for her lack of transparency. He listens as the woman reiterates her past as an adventurer, her voice cold as she explains that her party has long since disbanded. She warns that bringing along those without strength would only lead to more senseless death. Her gaze fixed on the shadows of the ruins. As they sit around the flickering embers of their small fire, she makes her stance clear. She has no need for companions on the path she walks. The weight of her solitude fills the stone chamber, emphasizing the gap between her experience and theirs. This declaration leaves both him and the young cleric in stunned silence, their eyes wide with the weight of her words. The reality of her rejection hangs heavy in the air between them. She continues her grim warning, gesturing toward the dark corridors where powerful monsters lie in wait. She questions their motives for being in such a dangerous place, advising them to abandon their quest before the dungeon claims them. He watches her as she explains the reason for her current, tattered appearance. A monster had stripped her of her high-level gear, leaving her with nothing but the rags she managed to scavenge. Despite her loss, she maintains a strange, unsettling confidence. Suddenly, she erupts in a fit of indignant rage, shouting about the humiliation she endured at the hands of the undead. Her companions can only stare in wide-eyed shock at the sudden volatility of her temper. She recounts the harrowing moment when the dry, skeletal hands of the undead tore her clothing away one by one. It was a violation that stripped her of her freedom and her pride, a memory that clearly still burns with resentment. In a sudden shift of mood, she leans uncomfortably close to him, teasingly commenting on his harsh but cute face. He recoils in a panic, shouting for her to stop as her proximity becomes far too graphic for his comfort. He quickly changes the subject, drawing his rusted blade to prove his own capability despite her warnings. She eyes the weapon with newfound interest, noting that it is one of the 7 legendary magic swords known to exist, each possessing tremendous power. He explains the blade's unique nature, describing how it absorbs the traits of the foes it strikes. He admits he doesn't know the full details, but after slashing a skeleton, the weapon itself began to take on a macabre, bone-like appearance. He finishes explaining the sword's nature, and she acknowledges the terrifying potential of a weapon that grows stronger with every kill, recognizing the danger inherent in such ability collection. As she stands before him, her presence becomes heavy and her gaze grows distant, as if she is seeing something far beyond the current moment. Memories of a burning village flood her mind, filled with the desperate cries of those who found no savior when the Demon King's shadow fell upon their homes. She remembers her own pride as a genius magician and the crushing weight of the duty she failed to fulfill, a failure that haunts her and one she refuses to repeat by allowing another monster to rise. Suddenly, her eyes sharpen with a cold, lethal resolve as she points a finger, declaring her intent to destroy the wicked abomination he carries before it can cause more harm. Because of this sudden threat, he pulls the blade closer, his knuckles whitening as she demands he hand over the magic sword to prevent further tragedy. He refuses her demand with a sharp, defiant no, but she has already begun to chant, calling upon the great water spirit Undine to annihilate those she deems foolish enough to stand in her way. In response to her command, a massive, churning sphere of water manifests in the air, a testament to her overwhelming magical prowess and her lack of restraint. With a final, focused word, she shapes the liquid mass into a lethal projectile, launching a water arrow directly at the pair. The resulting impact shatters the ground and sends debris flying, forcing him to throw himself over the cleric to shield her from the devastating rain of stone and magic. He scrambled away from the impact, his heart hammering against his ribs as he checked on his companion, the air still thick with the heat of the explosion. Behind them, the entrance to the tunnel had collapsed into a heap of jagged stone, sealing the path and underscoring the lethal power they had just narrowly escaped. Realizing they couldn't stay in the open, He urgently asked if she could keep up the pace, receiving a breathless but determined affirmation as they pushed deeper into the darkness. Far behind them, the source of the destruction stood amidst the settling dust, her dark gaze fixed on the horizon where her prey had vanished into the labyrinth. Having retreated deep into the labyrinthine stone corridors, he leaned against the cold wall, grateful that the chaos of the explosion and their smoke screen had provided enough cover for them to slip away and plan their next move. His momentum came to a sudden halt, however, when he rounded a corner and found a massive, perfectly roasted slab of meat sitting on a platter in the center of the path. He stared at the bizarre sight, questioning the logic of such a find in a place like this, while his companion seemed strangely enchanted by the absurdity, even calling the scene romantic. They both agreed that the meal was a blatant lure, a trap so obvious that only a complete fool would succumb to the temptation of fresh food in the middle of a dangerous dungeon. That logic was shattered instantly when they realized someone had already taken the bait. The former Demon King was already there, hunched over the meat and devouring it with primal intensity, having somehow bypassed them entirely. Before they could even process her presence, a sharp, crackling sound echoed through the hall, signaling that their brief moment of confusion was about to be replaced by a new threat. He watches in stunned silence as the massive slab of meat Rachel was devouring suddenly vanishes into thin air. The Demon King's eyes widen in shock, her predatory feast interrupted by an inexplicable force. She stares in disbelief as the empty platter clatters to the stone floor, while he cries out in confusion, noting that the meat has completely disappeared. Beside him, Liisa trembles, her voice shaking as she asks what is happening now. He watches as she shifts into a defensive stance, sensing a threat far greater than the two humans before her. She declares a temporary truce and commands them to get ready, her gaze fixed on the shadows ahead. She recognizes the creature instantly as a colossal silhouette emerges from the darkness, its presence so overwhelming it seems to swallow the light. Her voice drips with a mix of rage and dread as she identifies it as the very monster that had previously humiliated her. The boy's pupils dilate in pure terror as he stares up at the looming shadow, the realization of the scale of this new foe hitting him with the force of a physical blow. The skeletal figure loomed, a wight of immense power draped in tattered robes and clutching a gnarled staff, its hollow eyes radiating a cold, ancient malice. Seeing the creature, Kenichi's jaw dropped in disbelief, while Liisa quickly identified the threat, warning him that this was no ordinary monster, but a high-ranking magician brought back through the dark arts of necromancy, capable of wielding devastating spells. Meanwhile, the fallen queen was blinded by rage, convinced that this formidable opponent was merely another cowardly illusion designed to deceive her senses once again. With a defiant cry, the warrior lunged forward, determined to reclaim her stolen equipment from the skeletal foe at any cost. The resulting clash sent a violent shockwave through the stone corridor, a testament to the sheer force of her desperate assault. As the dust began to settle, Kenichi marveled at the ferocity of the strike, certain that no creature could survive such a blow, while Liisa urged him to prepare for their own move while the enemy was distracted. But the tide turned in an instant as a searing surge of magical energy tore through her, forcing a guttural scream of agony from her lips as she was repelled by an unseen force. She collapsed to the ground, smoke rising from her skin as the realization hit her. The magic robe she sought to reclaim possessed the power to nullify the very magic she relied upon, turning her own strength against her. The wight stood unmoved, its hollow gaze fixed upon the fallen woman as it raised its staff to deliver a final, crushing blow to the defenseless queen. In the face of this overwhelming power, he could only watch in horror, his voice cracking as he shouted her name while the air crackled with the imminent threat of the wight's dark power. He lunges with a desperate cry, his blade carving a bright arc through the air as it bites into the skeletal form of the wight. The creature recoils from the impact, its dark energy flickering as the strike connects, while Rachel watches from the floor, her eyes wide with shock at the sudden intervention. After the exertion, he collapses forward, gasping for air as the adrenaline begins to fade. He shouts out in pure terror, admitting how frightening the encounter was, while Rachel remains frozen, her gaze fixed on the young man who just risked his life for her. Looking down at the tattered remains of the magical robe scattered across the stone floor, he offers a sheepish apology. He realizes that in his haste to stop the monster, he inadvertently destroyed the very equipment Rachel was trying to reclaim. Rachel, still processing the turn of events, demands to know why he would bother saving her after everything that happened. He simply replies that it was his responsibility to stand his ground and recover the items that had been taken from him. She scoffs at his reasoning, insisting that her fate is her own and that she has lived a solitary life dedicated to her craft as a magician. She reminds him that she had even attacked him previously, making his act of heroism seem illogical to her. He meets her gaze steadily, dismissing her talk of duty and past grievances as irrelevant to the current moment. With a warm, disarming smile, he reminds her of the temporary truce they had agreed upon earlier. To him, that agreement transformed them into comrades, and he wouldn't dream of abandoning a partner in the heat of battle. As the tension between them softens, Liisa approaches, her presence a quiet comfort in the aftermath of the struggle. The three of them stand together in the silent, cavernous hall, a fragile alliance forged in the face of death. The silence is shattered as the pile of bones and tattered cloth begins to churn with a malevolent light. Liisa gasps in horror, realizing that the white is not truly defeated. It is drawing upon a dark, regenerative power to mend its broken form and rise once more. He stares in disbelief as the skeletal horror pulls itself back together, defying the finality of death. The sheer unfairness of the creature's resilience strikes him, and he can't help but feel that such a refusal to stay down is nothing short of cheating. He stood his ground, refusing to retreat even as Liisa pleaded for them to flee. While she saw only certain defeat and urged a desperate escape, he sensed a path to victory that remained hidden from her eyes, his resolve unshaken by the looming threat. With a sudden burst of speed, the young warrior lunged forward, his voice ringing out with a conviction that startled his companions. He declared with absolute certainty that the battle was far from over, charging headlong into the fray. As he closed the distance, he focused on the latent power within his rusted blade. He realized that Osoro possessed the unique ability to strip away the undead attributes of their foe, a realization that fueled his desperate charge and provided a glimmer of hope against the immortal creature. Warnings of his recklessness echoed in the air, suggesting that no sword, regardless of its power, could save an amateur from the white's dark sorcery. Yet, he ignored the voices of doubt and the memories of Hirotaka's arrogance, his eyes fixed solely on the skeletal monstrosity ahead. He glanced back briefly, ordering the two women to stay clear of the danger zone. His expression was no longer one of a mere junk collector, but of a man who had accepted the weight of the moment and the responsibility of protecting those behind him. Watching his back, Rachel was struck by a profound confusion. She could not fathom why this human would risk everything for her, a stranger and a fallen enemy, questioning the very nature of his resolve and why he would go to such lengths. The cleric softly explained that such selflessness was simply who he was. To him, abandoning someone in trouble right in front of him was an impossibility that his heart would not allow, regardless of the danger or the identity of the person in need. Seizing the opportunity to assist, she cast a protective enchantment upon him, bolstering his defenses for the clash to come. In response to the magic in his iron will, the blade in his hand began to pulse with a dark, jagged energy, transforming into a more formidable and menacing shape. Within the silence of her own mind, the Demon King reflected on the fleeting nature of their companionship. She pondered the divide between their duties, her role as a ruler and his as an adventurer, and the perceived impossibility of remaining together once their paths inevitably diverged, questioning if their bond was merely a temporary alignment of goals. Her voice finally broke through the chaos, calling out his name as he reached the white. With the creature looming over him and its dark magic swirling, he prepared to deliver a strike that would decide the fate of them all, his blade poised to sever the undead's connection to this world. He watches in alarm as Rachel begins to glow, her body shimmering with a volatile energy. He shouts a desperate warning, reminding her that her magic is failing and that pushing herself further will only lead to a total collapse from mana depletion. Despite his frantic protests, a faint, knowing smile touches her lips. She reminds him of his own words, that they are comrades now, and dismisses his concerns with a defiant shrug, as if the risk to her own life is of no consequence compared to the bond they form. She looks ahead with newfound resolve, her eyes narrowing as she accepts the necessity of her intervention. With a sharp movement, she flings a small, crystalline shard into the air, declaring that if the situation is truly this dire, she has no choice but to help. As the shard flies, a blinding burst of light erupts, carrying a silent, powerful command to cast aside the weight of past traumas and bloom with the brilliance of a true master of the arcane. The small object schemes across the cracked earth, trailing a faint glimmer as it speeds toward its destination, carrying with it the desperate hope of a fallen queen. A colossal pillar of energy erupts from the center of the chamber, shaking the very foundations of the dungeon with its raw intensity. Witnessing the sheer scale of the blast, Liisa gasps in awe at the incredible power being unleashed. Across the fray, Kenichi grits his teeth, his face a mask of pure determination as he prepares to capitalize on the opening. She realizes with a start that this force has completely bypassed Rachel's magic nullification, shredding through the white's protective magic robe as if it were nothing more than parchment. Having poured every ounce of her strength into the gambit, Rachel staggers, her mana reserves utterly depleted. She closes her eyes, silently entrusting the final blow to the young man who has defied all expectations. He roars a name from his past, a cry of defiance that echoes through the hall as he lunges forward. With a desperate surge of his unique ability, he activates Removal, targeting the very essence of the creature's undead attribute. The strike connects with bone-shattering force, Kenichi's blade carving through the monstrous form of the white. Under the weight of the assault, the creature's multi-skulled visage begins to crack and splinter, its dark energy finally failing. In a final, silent explosion of dust and shadow, the once formidable undead sorcerer disintegrates, its physical form scattering into the wind. As the dust settles, the chamber falls into a heavy silence, leaving only the survivors standing amidst the ruins of the battle. They look at one another, the reality of their victory slowly sinking in. Exhausted and trembling, Kenichi and Liisa share a moment of profound relief, hardly able to believe they survived the encounter. He immediately turns his attention to the wounded, urgently requesting that Liisa use her healing magic on Rachel, who is injured during the Whites' final assault. Liisa, though still shaken, quickly agrees to help. As the dust settles in the silent chamber, the group stands together, the weight of their victory hanging heavy in the air while Rachel watches them with a guarded expression. Breaking the silence, she addresses him by the name he has been using, Hirotaka, noting that since the White is defeated, their temporary alliance is nearing its end. But she has one final question she must ask before they part ways. She demands to know why he chose to release his hold on the powerful magic sword, especially after she had turned her blade against him in the heat of the conflict, questioning the logic behind his mercy. With a gentle, unassuming smile, he explains that his decision was simple. He considers her a companion, a sentiment that causes her to look away in quiet contemplation as she processes his unexpected kindness. Moved by his sincerity, she decides to drop her pursuit of the magic sword for the time being. But she makes it clear that this concession comes with a significant condition that will bind their fates further. Her gaze becomes piercing as she makes a startling request, asking him to join her in a quest to overthrow the Demon King himself, a goal that stands in stark contrast to their current situation. This unexpected proposal leaves both him and Liisa completely stunned, their faces frozen in a mask of pure disbelief. He begins to stammer a refusal, but she cuts him off with a light-hearted laugh, observing that he seems like the type who prefers a quiet life over troublesome heroics, and tells him there is no need for an immediate answer. Finally, she asks if she can remain by his side as a companion, promising to wait patiently until the day he finally changes his mind and accepts her offer. She accepts his hand in a firm grip, expressing her gratitude for the unexpected alliance. He responds with a stern warning, insisting that she must never misuse the power of the magic sword. She offers a light-hearted smile, assuring him that her inherent laziness precludes any such ambitious or malevolent desires, though she playfully vows to destroy the blade if he ever turns it against her. As they walk, he recalls the title he used for her earlier, questioning if she truly is the Demon King of Sloth. She clarifies with a calm, steady gaze that the name is not merely a commentary on her lack of motivation, but a formal title of her station. He seems taken aback, realizing the weight of the name he had previously used so casually. This revelation prompts him to consider the other rulers of the demon realm, recalling tales of demon kings associated with wrath and greed. He muses that none of them sound like particularly pleasant individuals, envisioning monstrous figures consumed by their namesake's sins. One never satisfied no matter how much they hoard, and another lost in a perpetual, violent rage. Breaking the heavy atmosphere with a bit of snark, he remarks that the title of Sloth would actually be a perfect fit for Hirotaka. This comment causes a minor stir. While she finds the comparison amusing, the young cleric beside them is quick to protest his bluntness, her face flushing with embarrassment at the casual insult toward their former companion. With the formalities of their new arrangement settled, he eagerly suggests they return to their original objective, the hunt for hidden treasure. She repeats the word with a look of genuine confusion, as if the very concept of searching for riches in this desolate place is entirely foreign to her. She explains that she has explored the deepest reaches of this labyrinthine domain and can state with absolute certainty that no such treasure exists. Her expression is one of flat disbelief, unable to comprehend why anyone would spend their time searching for something that simply isn't there. Undeterred, he produces a weathered parchment, insisting that his treasure map proves otherwise. The moment she lays eyes on the document, her skepticism turns to blunt dismissal, as she immediately identifies the supposed guide as a complete fabrication. He is visibly deflated, explaining that he purchased the map from a traveler at a tavern, hoping it would provide the funds necessary for their journey. As he recounts the transaction, the realization of his own gullibility begins to sink in, while his companions look on with a mixture of pity and exasperation at the obvious scam. A sudden realization strikes him as he reaches for his belongings, only to find the map missing from its usual place. He looks over to see her holding a piece of fabric, his confusion mounting as he wonders how she managed to take it and why she is looking at it with such a bewildered expression. The object in her hands is revealed not to be a map at all, but a pair of delicate, frilled undergarments. He stares in stunned silence, the gravity of his mistake, and the sheer absurdity of what he had been carrying as a treasure map, leaving him completely speechless. He tries to hide his lingering embarrassment, brushing off Rachel's concern with a dismissive wave as they approach their destination. Their arrival at the guild is marked not by triumph, but by a piercing cry of disbelief that echoes through the mountain air, lamenting the lack of gold. Inside, the receptionist is inconsolable, her dreams of a guild-saving windfall shattered, while the weary group can only offer silent, exhausted stares. Seeing her distress, the young man steps forward with a confident smile, suggesting that while the chests were empty, they didn't return empty-handed. He presents their new companion, now dressed in more modest but elegant attire, though he feels the need to apologize for the quality of the garments. As the others talk, he reflects on the ordeal, realizing that true strength must come from within rather than from the artifacts he scavenges. He explains the circumstances of their meeting at the ancient tomb, revealing the woman's past as a legendary S-rank adventurer. This revelation sends the receptionist into a frenzy of joy, as she practically worships the newcomer as the long-awaited savior of their struggling guild. The former adventurer accepts the warm welcome with a serene smile, promising to lend her considerable talents to their cause. While the receptionist celebrates this priceless treasure for the guild's reputation, the young man can only watch the chaotic scene with a mix of relief and mild annoyance. She welcomes the group back with a warm smile, officially dubbing them the Junketeers as they stand together in the guild hall. The name draws a knowing smirk from the dark-haired woman, but the young leader quickly defends it, insisting that the title reflects their shared effort and spirit. Beside him, the young cleric remains silent, her eyes wide as she processes the weight of their new identity. With the formalities concluded, a wave of exhaustion finally hits the youth, and he suggests they part ways for the evening to recover from the day's trials. Before she can depart, he reaches out to stop her, extending a small, wrapped bundle toward her trembling hands. He explains that while he had secured supplies for the others, he realized he had neglected to give her anything. He offers a pair of gloves, thoughtfully noting that they might help if her hands become damp while gripping her staff during the heat of battle. Her face flushes a deep crimson as she blurted out her acceptance, admitting with frantic intensity that her hands do indeed become slick with sweat whenever she grows nervous. After the awkward but heartfelt exchange, he bids her a final good night, leaving her standing alone as he disappears into the evening light. Back in the quiet of her own space, the young woman finds her heart racing, the rhythmic thumping in her chest echoing the silence of the room. She clutches the new gloves tightly against her chest, overwhelmed by the kindness she has received and the realization that she has yet to find a way to repay him. She reflects on her repeated failures, the memories of her defensive magic faltering against skeletal horrors haunting her as she recalls how success only came at the very last moment, leaving her feeling inadequate. She stares ahead because of these lingering doubts, her mind rejecting the simple excuses she usually offers herself while she searches for a way to truly contribute to the group. She feels the weight of her perceived uselessness crushing her, collapsing into herself as the shadows of those she couldn't protect seem to walk away into the distance. She is suddenly pulled from the gloom of her self-pity when a hand extends into her field of vision. She looks up to find the young man who accepted her despite his own struggles, his expression warm as he reminds her that the fear of disappointing others is a burden they both share. His kindness inspires her, and her eyes widen with a newfound resolve, a silent vow forming in her heart to finally become someone truly useful to the party. She is driven by this sudden spark of determination and throws open a door to seek guidance on magic, only to recoil in shock at the sight of the dark-haired woman lounging in a state of complete undress. While she reels from the encounter, the young man is startled from his rest in another room when the same woman appears, casually demanding a massage of her most sensitive areas. He stares up at the wooden ceiling, his mind racing with concern over what kind of strange influence the former Demon King might be exerting on his companion. He settles back into his pillow despite the chaotic turn of events, a small sense of peace washing over him as he realizes he is no longer alone in this strange world. He contemplates the quiet night sky from the safety of their lodging, a silent sense of gratitude washing over him as he reflects on his newfound fortune and the companions he has found. He finds this feeling of belonging only grows as the group, now calling themselves the Junketeers, settles into a rhythm of completing guild requests and sharing moments of hard-earned rest together. A few days later, the young man emerges from his sleep with a wide yawn, ready to face the morning, only to be struck by an immediate sense of confusion at the noise outside. Stepping into the guild hall, he is nearly pushed back by a massive, bustling crowd that has packed the building to its absolute limits, leaving him wondering what could have caused such a stir. As he navigates through the sea of people toward the counter, the very floorboards groan under the unprecedented weight of the throng, threatening to collapse at any moment. He finds the receptionist, Karuta, buried under a mountain of documents, her eyes wide with the stress of managing what she calls a monumental success, though she admits she can barely keep up with the paperwork. With a frantic energy, she thrusts a flyer toward him, revealing a garish advertisement for a beautiful men and women party featuring their own group, the Junketeers, as the star attraction. She watches his reaction as the sight leaves him speechless and weary. He realizes that the drawings Liisa had been working on for days were actually the source of this sudden, unwanted fame that has made them the talk of the town. He listens as Rachel calmly explains the logic behind the chaos, noting that when adventurers perform well, the guild's reputation improves, which in turn leads to an increase in both recruits and requests. The young man then overhears disgruntled newcomers complaining about the lack of handsome men and feeling tricked by false advertising, leaving him feeling personally insulted and annoyed by their vocal disappointment. They approach the group, clutching the flyer that has brought them there. One of the young men steps forward, his voice filled with a mix of skepticism and hope as he asks if they truly are the ones who conquered the horrors of Cain's tomb. He nods tentatively, confirming the rumors, which immediately ignites a spark of pure adoration in the surrounding crowd. The air fills with shouts of awesome as the reality of their feat sinks in. This admission triggers a landslide of questions, the voices overlapping in a frantic chorus. They clamor to know how the monsters were defeated, if the legendary curse was real, and just how much strength it took to survive such a place. One youth, his eyes wide with unbridled excitement, leans in close, practically begging for every detail of the encounter. He attempts to maintain a level of professional detachment, explaining that while it may seem extraordinary to others, for an adventurer, is simply the nature of the work. Yet, his words do little to dampen the growing fervor of the crowd. A companion places a steadying hand on his shoulder, observing with a knowing smile that it is his actions alone that have ignited this fire in the hearts of the townspeople. Nearby, she watches the spectacle with a growing sense of unease, pulling her hood tighter as she whispers to herself about how out of hand the situation has become. The focus of the crowd shifts from the deed to the man himself, as they begin to speculate wildly about his standing within the guild, certain that such a hero must surely hold an A or even S rank. He admits, with a blunt honesty that silences the cheering, that his official standing is merely E rank. The revelation hangs in the air like a lead weight, turning their awe into immediate, murmuring suspicion. She suddenly intervenes, her voice cutting through the rising doubt as she frantically insists there's a profound, hidden reason for his lowly rank, desperate to preserve the guild's newfound reputation. She leans into her fabrication with dramatic flair, claiming that he has intentionally suppressed his rank out of a noble conviction. She declares that for him, the true essence of an adventurer lies in altruism rather than the pursuit of riches or renown. Beside her, the young man can only stare in bewilderment, his mouth agape at the elaborate lie being woven around him. Her words ignite the crowd, transforming their suspicion into a roar of fervent admiration as they cheer for the humble hero. Seizing the momentum, she announces that to meet these newfound expectations, he has finally agreed to undergo the official rank promotion exam. She presents the formal notice, effectively trapping him in a path toward advancement he never sought, while the recruits celebrate what they believe is a dream becoming reality. The morning sun rose over the quiet town, marking the long-awaited day of the adventurer's examination. The venue was the grand hall of the One-Eyed Bear's Den Guild, where a crowd of hopeful candidates gathered beneath the high, vaulted ceilings. A guild official, his voice amplified by a megaphone, addressed the restless crowd. He directed those who had successfully navigated the written portion to the reception desk, while announcing that materials for the upcoming practical exam would soon be distributed to the remaining contenders. Among the crowd, the young man stood frozen, his face pale and eyes wide with the lingering stress of the ordeal. Beside him, his companions waited, their expressions a mix of quiet relief and stoic indifference. Their presence did not go unnoticed, as other examinees whispered among themselves, choosing to keep a respectful distance from the peculiar trio. The tension finally broke into a jubilant roar as the results were confirmed. They had passed the initial Q&A test. He threw his arms up in triumph, his shout of joy echoing through the hall, while the young cleric joined in his celebration. Their dark-haired companion, however, remained unimpressed, sighing at their exuberant display over what she considered a trivial hurdle. The victory was hard-won, preceded by grueling hours of study where the young man had struggled even with the most fundamental concepts. His tutor had grown increasingly exasperated, pointing out his lack of basic knowledge while he defensively shifted the blame for his confusion onto her teaching methods. Now, with the first hurdle behind them, he let out a long sigh of relief. While his tutor urged him to reflect on his poor performance, the cleric offered a gentle smile, finding that despite the difficulty, their time spent studying together had been quite enjoyable. He is full of energy, his eyes bright with determination as he looks forward to the practical exam. He admits to himself that he doesn't want to let down the expectations of those at the guild, his voice carrying a newfound confidence. Meanwhile, back at a local establishment called the White Cat's Mistletoe, rumors are flying thick and fast. Patrons laugh and speculate about Hirotaka's party, wondering if they've already reached S rank or perhaps even the legendary SSS rank, convinced they are dominating whatever challenges they face. The sky remains clear as the day progresses, the sun hanging high over the distant treeline, signaling the passage of time. By the afternoon, the examinees have gathered at the edge of No Morass Forest, the designated venue for the practical portion of the test. The guild official outlines the grueling requirements. Candidates must defeat 3 monsters, collect 2 specific types of medicinal herbs, and successfully transport supplies to a base camp hidden deep within the woods. Looking out at the familiar foliage, the young man feels a wave of nostalgia wash over him. It wasn't long ago that Sir Hirotaka had come to his aid in these very woods, and where the living sword of sorrow had first proven its worth in his hands. Nearby, the dark-haired magician gazes at the trees, recalling that this was the same location where Liisa had previously been ambushed by monsters. She turns to the young cleric, commending her for maintaining her magical studies despite the pressure of the upcoming exam. She notes that thanks to the intervention of Hirotaka and the magic sword, the world didn't lose such a promising talent, though the girl modestly downplays her own abilities. Reaching out, the magician gently pats the girl's head, expressing genuine admiration for her dedication to the craft as a fellow practitioner. The gesture leaves the cleric looking surprised and touched by the unexpected praise. However, the moment of sincerity is quickly shattered when she makes a characteristically lewd suggestion about where she'd prefer a massage, prompting the young man to deliver a swift, corrective chop to her head to silence her antics. He stands at the edge of the forest, watching as the other examinees surge forward with competitive fervor. They shout to one another, eager to claim the first kills and leave the mundane task of herb gathering to those trailing behind. Among the crowd, a boisterous, muscular man named Edgar leads his own group, his confidence radiating as he rallies his companions. A nearby observer questions why the young man isn't joining Hirotaka's elite circle, noting the presence of other known adventurers like Balin and Scott. The sheer number of participants is overwhelming, a sea of aspiring heroes all gathered for this single purpose. It is a stark realization of just how many people have come to test their mettle in these dangerous woods. This influx of adventurers is no coincidence. The country has been forced to bolster its ranks in response to a surge in monster activity over recent years. The forest, once manageable, has become a breeding ground for threats that require constant vigilance. As they walk, Rachel points out that this heightened aggression is likely the reason Liisa was targeted previously. She notes that the guild has been flooded with subjugation requests, reflecting a world increasingly under siege by the unnatural. He remains silent, his mind drifting to the horrific visages of the creatures that roam the dark, skeletal remains and predatory beasts that seem driven by a singular, malevolent purpose. A troubling question begins to take root in his mind. Why is it that these monsters seem to focus their malice exclusively on humanity? Rachel dismisses the thought with a casual shrug, asserting that such behavior is simply the nature of the beasts and nothing out of the ordinary. Above them, the sudden flight of birds suggests a disturbance that contradicts her nonchalance. Without warning, a violent tremor rips through the earth, nearly throwing them from their feet. The air is filled with the sharp crack of shifting stone and the sudden, jarring roar of an unseen force. Panic erupts instantly as the ground continues to heave, sending the other examinees into a frantic retreat. Amidst the screams and the dust, he and Rachel can only stare in shock, wondering if the very earth is turning against them. He stands frozen as a wave of overwhelming mana washes over the group, the air itself growing heavy with an ancient pressure. Liisa trembles, sensing a presence far beyond anything she has ever encountered, while their elven companion wonders if an impossibly strong monster has just appeared in the heart of the forest. Beside him, the dark-haired woman narrows her eyes, her gaze sharpening as she tries to pierce through the dense foliage and identify the source of this suffocating aura. Despite the palpable dread, he urges the others forward, determined to help whoever might be in danger. Even as a faint, ghostly voice whispers a rejection into the air, echoing with a strange finality. Deep within the shadows of the trees, a figure with dark, curved horns and a spade-tipped tail stirs, her presence warping the very atmosphere around her. She mutters a repetitive, listless denial, her eyes downcast as if burdened by a profound boredom or a search that has yielded nothing but disappointment. The horned girl wanders aimlessly through the undergrowth, her small frame belying the catastrophic power radiating from her every step as she continues her rhythmic refusal. Emerging into a clearing, he and Liisa stumble upon what appears to be a lost child, but their companion recoils in sudden, sharp terror. While the others are confused, the elven woman realizes she has finally found the source of the anomaly, though the discovery is far more horrifying than she anticipated. The girl's gaze shifts, revealing a cold, ancient intensity that confirms the woman's worst fears. They're standing in the presence of a demon king. She lets out a long, weary sigh, complaining that the task of checking each individual is an exhausting drag. Her voice is devoid of any passion, suggesting that even the act of existing is a burden she barely tolerates. Stunned into a collective silence, the three of them can only watch as the embodiment of sloth regards them with a look of utter apathy, the exam now the furthest thing from their minds. He stood unaware as the rusted blade at his hip remained silent, a seemingly worthless trinket to any observer. Suddenly, the small, horned girl drifted through the air toward him, her movements defying gravity and catching the entire group off guard. She leaned in close, her eyes wide and unsettling as she issued a chilling demand for him to return what he had taken. Before he could react, the elven woman launched a desperate magical strike to protect him, but the girl swatted the attack away as if it were a mere nuisance, warning them not to interfere. The elf watched in disbelief as her most potent strike, capable of piercing defensive magic, was neutralized by a single finger, leaving a crater in the earth behind them. Nearby, Liisa stood paralyzed by the sheer pressure of the girl's presence, her vision blurring as she struggled to comprehend the overwhelming power on display. Returning her focus to the boy, the horned intruder mocked his lack of strength, deeming him a pathetic human unworthy of even being killed while she pondered the identity of the true culprit. With a sudden, blurred motion, she snatched the rusted dagger from his belt, ordering him to surrender the weapon immediately. He instinctively reached out to reclaim his property, but she pulled back, accusing him of being the thief in this encounter. Looming over him with a gaze of cold authority, she finally revealed her true nature as Gisela, the demon king of sloth and the rightful contractor of the living blade, Osora. She stands before him, the weight of her title as the demon king of sloth hanging heavy in the air. Kenichi's mind reels as he struggles to process the term contractor and the true nature of the rusted blade he found. She reaches out, her small hand clamping onto the scabbard with a grip that feels like iron. She then effortlessly hoists him into the air, the sword serving as a handle for her immense, unnatural strength. From the ground, the others watch in stunned silence, unable to comprehend how such a small body could possess such overwhelming power. Looking him directly in the eye, she questions him with a cold intensity. asking if he truly intended to abandon Osoro. He is paralyzed by the realization that his habit of collecting junk has led him into a contract with a legendary weapon, a mistake that now carries life or death consequences. Turning her attention away from the boy, she speaks to the blade itself, commanding it to return home with her. She pulls at the weapon, expecting it to slide easily from the boy's grasp and back into her possession. However, the sword reacts with a violent tremor, its single eye widening in a clear sign of defiance against its former master. The force of the rejection pushes her back, leaving the boy standing in the grass, still holding the scabbard while the living blade stares up at him with unsettling focus. She retreats into the sky, her face twisted in a mask of irritation and disgust as she leaves the trash behind, leaving him alone with a weapon that has seemingly chosen him over a demon king. He watches as the demon king of sloth loses her composure entirely, her face contorted in a childish yet terrifying rage as she declares her intent to slaughter everyone present. Following her outburst, she erupts in a violent surge of dark energy that radiates outward, her small frame silhouetted against the blinding light of her own malice. With a predatory gleam in her eyes, she plunges downward, her descent fueled by a sudden, murderous impulse to reclaim what she believes is hers. In response to the incoming threat, he grips the hilt of the rusted dagger, and the single eye of the sentient weapon snaps open, sensing the impending clash. As he braces himself, the small blade undergoes a grotesque transformation, expanding into a massive, multi-eyed broadsword that pulses with an ancient, dark power, catching the demon king off guard. She halts her advance, her expression shifting from bloodlust to genuine shock as she stares at the weapon that has so thoroughly rejected her in favor of a mere human. Behind him, a towering, shadowy manifestation of the sword's true essence rises, its voice echoing with a chilling promise of pain for anyone who dares to touch its new master, while he remains steadfast, refusing to relinquish his bond with the blade. Kenichi stands firm in the forest clearing, gripping the sentient blade Osoro with both hands. Across from him, the demon king of sloth warns him that a quick death is not an option, her voice cold and mocking. He narrows his eyes, declaring with absolute certainty that he will never surrender his weapon to her. Suddenly, she vanishes in a blur of motion, her speed far exceeding anything he anticipated. He barely has time to react as she closes the distance in an instant, her hand reaching out to strike. A colossal explosion of force erupts, a white-hot streak of energy carving a path of total devastation through the dense tree-line and leveling everything in its wake. The sheer pressure of the blast sends him tumbling backward, his boots carving deep furrows into the dirt as he struggles to maintain his footing. He stares in disbelief at the leveled landscape, shocked by the magnitude of her power. She looms over him, dark energy swirling around her form like a physical manifestation of her malice as she prepares to finish the encounter. As he grips his sword, a violent surge of energy rattles his very bones, forcing a cry of pain from his throat. The Demon King pauses, her expression shifting to one of genuine confusion. Her strike should have reduced the entire area to ash, yet the moment it connected, the force simply dissipated into nothingness. She demands an explanation for the anomaly, her voice laced with growing irritation as she glares at the young man. He stands his ground, the weight of the encounter pressing down on him, but his resolve remains unbroken. He reveals the truth behind the phenomenon, a skill known as mana break. He explains that it is a power inherent to Osoro that systematically dismantles the mana of anyone who dares to make contact with the blade, effectively neutralizing magical assaults. This ability, a remnant from their victory over the White, had been dormant until Osoro chose this moment to activate it. Emboldened, he warns her that her magical attacks will no longer work on him and tells her to give up and go home. Despite his defiant words, he is drenched in sweat, his mind racing as he assesses the situation. He realizes that while her magic is being neutralized, her physical strength is immense, and she shows no signs of fatigue, meaning he must find a way to end this quickly before his own stamina fails. He stands his ground as the Demon King of Sloth stares in disbelief, her confusion turning to indignation as she accuses him of being nothing more than a common thief for wielding her blade. In response, he clarifies the nature of his power, explaining that he didn't steal the blade, but rather salvaged it through his unique ability to collect discarded items every 12 hours. The revelation that the legendary weapon was found among trash from the Demon King's own castle leaves her stunned. He seizes the moment to point out the obvious. If the sword was available for him to find, it means she must have cast it aside, a realization that makes her visibly flustered. She stammers in a desperate attempt to save face, claiming she never truly discarded the magic sword, but merely misplaced it for several decades. An oversight that apparently drew the ire of the other Demon Kings. He isn't buying the excuse, shouting back that neglecting a weapon for decades is no different from throwing it away, and that she is simply facing the consequences of her own laziness. Infuriated by his bluntness, she erupts in a fit of rage, calling him an arrogant human and threatening to crush him like an insect while they begin a childish exchange of insults. The two continue their heated bickering in the middle of the clearing, their voices echoing through the trees as they repeatedly call each other stupid, completely abandoning the gravity of their previous magical duel. From the edge of the woods, the onlookers watch the bizarre spectacle in silence, the tension of the battle replaced by a sense of utter bewilderment at the lack of dignity shown by the powerful combatants. Liisa can hardly believe her eyes, questioning if this petulant figure is truly a demon king, while her companion notes with grim respect that Kenichi is somehow holding his own on equal footing with such a being. Despite the shouting, the demon king eventually softens, admitting that while she may have neglected the sword, they shared a long history, even if that history involved using the sentient blade as a mere backscratcher during her long periods of lethargy. She reached her breaking point, her voice echoing through the clearing as she declared her patience had finally run out. Startled by her sudden outburst, he barely had time to react before a commotion from the nearby brush caught his attention. Emerging from the dense foliage, a large contingent of armed men and women charged forward, their weapons drawn and faces set with grim determination. Leading the charge, the muscular warrior skidded to a halt, his eyes widening in disbelief as he questioned if the small figure before them was truly the threat they sought. Despite the confusion, the call to arms rang out, urging the gathered fighters to unite their strength and bring down the adversary standing in their path. A wave of uneasy whispers rippled through the ranks as the true nature of their opponent dawned on them. The mere mention of a demon king sending a chill through the air. Unfazed by their numbers, she let out a low, mocking chuckle, her fingers grazing her chin as a dark intent flickered in her eyes. She invoked an ancient power, calling upon the spectral bell to awaken the dormant blood clan through the sacrifice of offered life. The shadows themselves seemed to tear open, birthing hulking, winged monstrosities that loomed over the clearing, leaving him paralyzed with dread at the sight of such raw, demonic power. She pointed a commanding finger toward the trembling soldiers, her voice cold and devoid of mercy as she ordered her newly summoned vampires to begin the slaughter. She watches with cold indifference as her winged nightmares descend upon the screaming men. The air is filled with the piercing screeches of the blood clan, their leathery wings beating a rhythm of impending death. Kenichi can only stare in horror as the slaughter begins. He screams for the carnage to end, his voice cracking under the weight of the unfolding tragedy. The soldiers' cries of agony are cut short by the monster's claws. Amidst the chaos, the demon king leans in close, her voice a mocking whisper, asking if he truly has the luxury of looking away from the consequences of his defiance. Without warning, she lashes out, her very hair becoming a weapon that sends him tumbling backward. She reminds him of the sheer gulf in power between them, declaring that he is facing a true demon king. Her eyes flash with malice as she warns that his refusal to return the stolen blade will be his final regret. The Dark Monarch doesn't stop there, her hands beginning to glow with a sickly, spectral light. She begins a new, deeper incantation, calling upon the spirits of death to bring forth even more formidable warriors to join her macabre army. Kenichi watches, paralyzed, as the ground itself seems to groan under the weight of her dark magic. Suddenly, a different kind of power erupts from the treeline as the elven woman steps forward, her own voice ringing out with the command of necromancy. Massive, hulking skeletons, their bones fused with dark energy and rotting sinew, rise from the earth to meet the vampire swarm. She stands firm against the demonic onslaught, her gaze fixed on the Dark Queen. With a sharp, defiant shout, the elf makes it clear that she will not stand idly by while the demon king wreaks havoc, positioning her own undead guardians as a shield for the living. The soldiers, caught between two types of monsters, are gripped by a new wave of confusion and terror. They recoil from the stench of the rotting giants, unsure if these new arrivals are allies or simply another nightmare. Some raise their swords in a desperate, trembling defense, unable to process the sight of zombies fighting on their behalf. Seeing the panic, Liisa grips her staff tightly, her knuckles white as she begins a frantic prayer to the Holy Mother. Her voice trembles, but holds steady as she pleads for a divine shield to encompass the terrified men, her mana beginning to swirl in a bright, golden aura. With a final, desperate cry, she unleashes her magic, a shimmering dome of protection expanding to cover the battlefield. The golden light pushes back the shadows, and the soldiers feel a sudden surge of hope as the barrier holds firm against the screeching vampires. Both women stand as the new line of defense, their faces etched with a grim resolve. Liisa vows to protect everyone, her thoughts lingering on Hirotaka, while the elven necromancer reflects on how much has changed since her last failure. Determined that this time, the outcome will be different. She stands firm alongside Liisa, their resolve clear as they face the looming threat. Liisa cries out to Hirotaka, pleading for him to leave the situation to them while they hold the line. Watching from a distance, Kenichi calls out their names in a mix of concern and disbelief, his eyes wide as he witnesses the unfolding confrontation between his companions and the Demon King. Rachel, the Demon King of Sloth, observes the elven woman's magic with a twisted grin. She recognizes the necromancy as a forbidden art created by a Demon King long ago, a power far beyond the reach of any ordinary magician. Despite her display of power, the dark-haired elf admits her own limitations, acknowledging that her inexperience makes her no match for a Demon King's true strength. She sternly warns Kenichi to stay back and not interfere in the battle. Turning her focus to the seasoned warrior, she declares that while she cannot win alone, their combined strength might be enough to topple the Demon King. Kenichi listens, his expression hardening as the weight of the situation sinks in. He reflects on his simple desire for a carefree life, a dream now shattered by the reality of fighting a demon king. Yet, a cold determination takes hold. He will show no mercy to anyone who dares to harm his companions. With a sudden, decisive movement, the young man draws his blade and lunges forward. He shouts his intent to bring down the demon king of sloth, his previous hesitation replaced by a fierce resolve. His declaration is met only with mocking laughter from Rachel. She finds the notion that such a ragtag group could defeat a being of her stature utterly ridiculous, her eyes gleaming with sadistic amusement. Seizing the moment, Hirotaka rallies the surrounding warriors, urging them to support the attack and not let up. Rachel watches the approaching horde, her expression shifting to one of mild, predatory interest. As the first wave of attacks reaches her, she effortlessly lashes out with her dark, whip-like hair. With a single, contemptuous sweep, she shatters the incoming undead, proving that numbers mean nothing against her overwhelming power. She watches as the undead horde surges forward, their hollow sockets fixed on their target. She observes the approaching mass with a look of pure disdain, muttering about how they swarm like mindless insects. Suddenly, her eyes widen as she realizes her primary target has vanished from her sight. Amidst the chaos of the skeletal ranks, Kenichi has used the distraction to slip away, weaving through the undead with practiced agility. The realization hits her too late. He had blended in with the mindless thralls to strike from her blind spot. With a triumphant shout, he lunges forward, closing the distance in a heartbeat. He swings his blade with everything he has, the rusted metal whistling through the air toward her exposed side. However, she is far from defenseless, effortlessly shifting her weight to avoid the strike while mocking his predictable tactics. She calls him naive, her voice dripping with the arrogance of a superior being. As she glides away, she casts a final, mocking glance over her shoulder at the struggling human. He pauses for a fleeting second, his head tilted back as he catches his breath, the weight of the battle beginning to show. He plants his foot firmly into the dirt, his face contorting with a renewed, desperate resolve. He launches a follow-up attack with a sudden burst of speed that catches even her off guard. Her smug expression vanishes, replaced by genuine shock as he refuses to stay down. He lunged forward with desperate intensity, but the counterattack was swifter than he could have anticipated. A jagged, blood-slicked blade tore through the air, impaling his hand with sickening force. Despite the searing agony and the sweat pouring down his face, he gritted his teeth, refusing to let go of his weapon as the demonic presence loomed behind him. She stares in disbelief as the strike connects, her expression shifting from arrogance to a strange sort of amusement. Below her, the young man grits his teeth, pouring every ounce of his remaining strength into the desperate gambit. Because of the impact, she leans in close, her voice a low purr as she admits her surprise that a mere human could land a single blow on her. She notes that the strike actually managed to cause her pain, a feat she clearly didn't expect. He can only stare back in silence, his mind reeling from the realization that his desperate attack actually drew blood from such a formidable entity. Moments later, her form begins to dissolve into shimmering particles, a faint smile lingering on her lips as she promises to remember the name Hirotaka. He stands frozen, watching as the terrifying presence that nearly ended them all simply fades into the wind. Nearby, the surviving examinees watch the spectacle in stunned silence, struggling to process the sight of the monster turning to dust before their eyes. One by one, they realize the threat has vanished, leaving only questions in its wake. As the realization of their survival sinks in, a deafening roar of triumph echoes through the forest. The air, once thick with malice, is now filled with the frantic joy of those who thought they were doomed. Amidst the distant cheering, he stands alone in the quiet of the trees, his hand trembling and slick with blood. The adrenaline that sustained him is rapidly fading, replaced by a crushing weight in his chest and a sharp, biting pain in his side. Suddenly, the sound of frantic footsteps breaks his solitude as Liisa and her companions burst through the foliage, their faces etched with worry. He looks up at them, a thin trail of blood escaping his lips, his vision starting to swim. Seeing their familiar faces, a faint, weary smile touches his lips as he whispers his relief at their safety. The world around him begins to lose its sharp edges, the voices of his friends sounding as if they are coming from far away. The warrior feels his strength finally failing, his thoughts drifting to the sentient blade that fought by his side, wondering if it survived the ordeal. Darkness begins to creep in from the periphery of his vision, heavy and inescapable. With a final, soft thud, he collapses onto the forest floor, his body finally giving out under the strain of the battle. Behind him, the panicked cries of his name fill the air as his friends rush to his side, their victory suddenly tasting like ash. The news of the battle spread through the town like wildfire. Reactions were a chaotic mix of terror and skepticism, as the citizens struggled to process the impossible events that had transpired. Because of the magnitude of the claim, the rumor that someone had actually defeated the Demon King became the sole focus of every conversation, overshadowing all other concerns in the village. Amidst the growing public fervor, Lisa's voice rang out with pure, unadulterated joy as she urged everyone to witness the miracle unfolding before them. She watched as the young man finally pushed himself upright, his movements shaky and uncertain. He felt like a child learning to walk for the first time, while the air around him filled with the tearful cheers of his companions. The cleric's relief quickly dissolved into tears as she recounted the horror of his condition, explaining that he had lost so much blood that even her most potent healing magic had failed to rouse him from his deep slumber. He listened in stunned silence as she confessed her paralyzing fear, admitting that the thought of losing him had left her completely distraught and uncertain of their future. In an attempt to lighten the heavy atmosphere, he let out a playful, infantile sound, though the gesture only earned him a look of mild disdain from Rachel, who questioned if he could manage something a bit more sophisticated. Moments later, he offered a sincere apology to Rona and the others for the worry he had caused, only to learn that he had been unconscious for 3 full days while they kept watch over him. As the group gathered, Rachel stepped forward to offer her own gratitude, acknowledging the miracle he had performed by repelling the Demon King without a single life being lost, and declaring him to be truly exceptional. Despite her praise, he could not shake the heavy weight of guilt, insisting that the entire ordeal was his responsibility because his refusal to part with the sentient blade had put everyone, even innocent bystanders, in mortal peril. He lowers his head in a deep apology, his voice heavy with the weight of the lives lost. He explains that the regular soldiers were never a match for a Demon King, and his decision to involve them still haunts him. In response to his confession, Lisa's eyes widen with a mix of shock and empathy. She begins to speak, her voice trembling slightly as she searches for the right words to comfort him. She admits that, at first, the magic sword terrified her, viewing it only as a dark omen of a Demon King's immense and terrifying power. However, her perspective has shifted, and she expresses a quiet joy that he chose to keep it. As he gazes down at the rusted blade in his hands, the weight of its history feels different now. Liisa continues, noting that the sword is more than just a weapon. It is a partner he refused to discard. A warm, genuine smile spreads across her face as she reiterates how glad she is that he didn't give up on something so vital to him. Her kindness offers a brief respite from his self-imposed guilt. The dark-haired elf, who had been listening intently, adds her own perspective, her sharp eyes softening slightly. She remarks that if he were the kind of man to abandon his companions, even a sentient sword, she never would have followed him this far. Stunned by their unwavering support, he can only offer a simple, heartfelt word of gratitude. The tension in his shoulders begins to dissipate as he realizes he is not alone in this burden. Meanwhile, the others in the room exchange confused glances, the revelation of a magic sword catching them completely off guard. They hadn't realized the true nature of the weapon he carried. He quickly tries to hush the conversation, desperate to keep the sword's sentience a secret from the wider group. But his attempts at secrecy are interrupted by a sudden, loud exclamation from across the room. Stepping up to command the room's attention, Karuta clears her throat, her expression professional yet bright. She announces that she has an important update specifically for him, though she warns it might lessen the impact of what she was originally going to say. She leans forward with sparkling eyes, her voice brimming with excitement as she acknowledges the group's incredible feats during the recent struggle against the Demon King. With a flourish, she pulls a celebratory banner that unfurls to reveal a startling decree. The Junketeers are being promoted directly to C rank, a leap that leaves the young adventurer speechless. He can hardly believe the news, stammering out a question as she confirms that such a rapid ascent is entirely unprecedented in the guild's history. The receptionist continues, her tone shifting to the logistical strain the guild is facing. The influx of new members has been so great that they are desperately short-staffed. Nearby, the large warrior laughs heartily, suggesting they deserved an even higher rank for their victory, though the young man remains humble, pointing out they hadn't even completed their formal exams. Outside, the news of the subjugation has already spread like wildfire, with eyewitnesses recounting the events to eager crowds, their stories growing more sensational with every telling. As he walks through the bustling streets, he overhears citizens praising Hirotaka's supposed elegance in battle, a narrative that he knows is far from the chaotic truth. Suddenly, a cold chill runs down his spine as a hooded figure leans in close, her presence unnoticed until she is right beside him. She whispers a chilling correction into his ear, claiming the Demon King was defeated by her hair alone, and warns him with a sharp look to remain silent about what he knows. The figure, revealed as the Demon King of Sloth herself, idly toys with a small familiar while issuing a final, lazy threat. If the commotion continues to disturb her peace, she won't hesitate to end everyone's lives. She leans in close, her voice a low, commanding murmur as she demands a private audience. Kenichi, caught off guard and visibly trembling, can barely stammer a response before she turns and orders him to follow. They move through the quiet streets of the town, the morning sun casting long shadows across the timber-framed houses. The tension of their meeting is momentarily broken as she indulges in a local delicacy, her eyes closing in pure, unadulterated bliss as she savors the flavor. Humming a cheerful tune, the demon leads the way through the cobblestone streets, leaving Kenichi to wonder why he is currently playing host and benefactor to a being of such immense power. Behind them, his companions watch with a mixture of confusion and concern. He finally finds the courage to voice the question burning in his mind. asking how she survived their previous encounter. She merely laughs, dismissing the idea that such a triviality could ever end her existence. This revelation leaves the entire group stunned, their faces etched with a combination of disbelief and growing dread as they realize the magnitude of the entity standing before them. Sensing a potential threat, he instinctively reaches for the hilt of his sentient blade, questioning if her true motive is to reclaim the weapon he now carries. She responds with a playful, knowing look. The two stand in a silent standoff, the air thick with unspoken tension as he remains poised for a conflict that she seems entirely uninterested in pursuing. She sighs at the predictability of human aggression, explaining that she has no desire for a mindless brawl and has instead conceived a far more intriguing proposition. With a mischievous glint in her eyes, she delivers a shocking ultimatum, declaring that he should abandon his path and instead ascend to the rank of a demon king himself. She watches as the three of them freeze in utter disbelief, their faces contorted with shock at her preposterous suggestion. Kenichi can only manage a stunned gasp, his mind reeling from the weight of her words. As the silence of the guild grounds stretches between them, she commands their attention, urging them to listen closely to her reasoning. Kenichi remains speechless, still struggling to find his voice in the wake of her declaration. Floating with a carefree air, the demon explains that the reality of being a demon king is far more troublesome than it appears. She details the constant harassment from those seeking her magic sword and the lethal threats from challengers, noting that even losing the blade would only invite the wrath of the other demon kings. Reaching out to poke him firmly in the chest, she insists that despite the burdens, he is uniquely suited for the position. Her tone is light, yet there is an underlying seriousness to her assessment of his potential. A memory of his desperate struggle against the one-eyed beast flashes through his mind as she questions if he has noticed the changes in himself. She asks if his body has felt unusually light, sturdy, or possessed of a strength that defies logic, forcing him to confront the physical anomalies he has experienced. With a predatory glint in her eyes, she reveals the source of this newfound power. The magic sword has taken a liking to him. She explains that the sentient weapon is actively enhancing his physical form, weaving its dark influence into his very muscles and bones. Kenichi and Liisa discuss the unnatural strength displayed by Hirotaka. Liisa reasons that even if Hirotaka wasn't fighting with full intent, a mere human shouldn't be able to withstand or dodge a direct attack from a demon king. A realization begins to dawn on the young man as he looks down at the sentient blade sheathed at his hip. He finally understands the true nature of the power he witnessed during the confrontation. Suddenly, the dark-haired woman leans in close, her face inches from his as she proposes a formal contract. She offers him the very title of Demon King, but he recoils instantly, shouting a firm refusal. His companion steps forward, her voice sharp with alarm as she rejects the offer on his behalf. She warns him that contracting with a magic sword to become a demon king is a dangerous path that fundamentally alters one's personality. She continues, her brow furrowed with deep concern. The thought of Hirotaka being forced into such a dark role against his will clearly weighs heavily on her mind, and she fears the same fate for her friend. The demonic figure merely smiles, her expression unreadable beneath her hood. She dismisses the concerns, claiming that becoming a demon king is simply about being true to one's deepest, most primal desires. As she speaks, she gestures toward the jagged blade, explaining that by accepting the mantle, he could unlock the weapon's true potential. She promises him absolute freedom and power beyond measure, unburdened by any laws or expectations. He pauses, the words freedom and leisure echoing in his mind. For a fleeting moment, the temptation of a life without struggle or responsibility seems to take hold of his thoughts. However, the spell is quickly broken as he points out a glaring contradiction. He questions why she is promoting the role so heavily when she had just finished complaining about how much of a hassle being a demon king actually was. In a final, emphatic declaration, he rejects the dark path entirely. While he intends to keep adventuring with his sentient sword, he has no interest in the throne. His only true ambition is to live a simple, lazy life, free to enjoy a drink whenever he pleases. He stands his ground against the persistent demands of the demon king of sloth, who refuses to leave until he accepts the throne. She insists that he stop being stubborn about such a weird thing, while the surrounding companions can only watch in bewilderment as the bizarre argument unfolds, noting how strange the situation has become. Beside him, the young cleric remains silent, her gaze downcast as she grips her staff, lost in her own thoughts regarding the strange turn of events and the weight of the decision he faces. As the sun begins to set over the quiet village, the initial chaos of the encounter begins to settle into a new, albeit strange, reality for the group. To everyone's surprise, the demonic entity makes herself quite at home, much to the shock of the guild receptionist who can only stare in disbelief at the casual intrusion into their daily lives. The following days blur into a routine of training and domesticity, with the group slowly adjusting to their unusual living arrangement while the young man continues to hone his skills with his sentient blade, all under the watchful eyes of his companions. Returning home after another long day of labor, he is greeted warmly by the cleric, the exhaustion of his efforts evident in his heavy sigh as he steps through the threshold and announces his return. Once inside, The conversation turns toward his progress at the dojo, with his companions inquiring if he has finally grown accustomed to the rigorous sword training required of him. He responds with a burst of newfound energy, leaping into the air to demonstrate a flamboyant special move he's devised, which he proudly dubs his super ultra domestic Osoro slash. While the elven warrior remains skeptical of his practical experience, the young cleric listens intently to his boastful display. Later, standing in the quiet of the room, a moment of profound realization washes over him as he looks at the weapon at his hip. He acknowledges that his successes were never his alone. Everyone has been helping him this entire time, and he'd been foolish to think he was doing well on his own without realizing Osoro's constant support. She watches him with wide eyes, caught off guard by his sudden admission of vulnerability. He confesses that, despite his previous bravado, he realizes now that he was just a weak human after all, a sentiment that leaves her momentarily speechless. She watches as the young man reflects on the fear he felt when others were put in danger because of him. Clenching his fist with newfound resolve, he declares his absolute need to grow stronger to prevent such a thing from happening again. He is interrupted by Gisela, who suggests that the fastest path to power is for him to become a demon king himself. He dismisses the idea immediately, his mind briefly flickering to the image of the formidable Hirotaka and the standard he must reach. His confusion only grows moments later when she suddenly appears in a new, frilly attire, striking a pose with a cheerful exclamation. The transformation leaves both him and the young cleric utterly bewildered, while the guild receptionist, Rona, watches the spectacle with a mix of amusement and confusion. She is met with his suspicious gaze as he questions what she could possibly be planning despite her supposedly lazy nature. She simply brushes off his concerns, basking in her own appearance and claiming that she looks good in anything she chooses to wear. She leans in with a mischievous glint in her eyes, revealing that she has brought a particularly enticing request. She admits that even she can find motivation when the future looks sufficiently comfortable and profitable. She then produces a formal document with a flourish, announcing it as a joint subjugation request that has just been issued. She watches his shock as Rona steps in to explain the gravity of the situation, noting that such requests are only issued for monsters so dangerous they require the cooperation of multiple guilds to defeat. The true nature of the threat is then unveiled, a legendary beast that stands above all others. It is a dragon, a creature of myth and shadow that strikes fear into the hearts of even the bravest warriors. It leaves him and his companions, including the dark-haired elf, frozen in collective shock. The word dragon hangs heavy in the air, a name they never expected to face in their current state. He and the others begin to discuss the sheer impossibility of the task, noting that dragons are so rare they are often relegated to fairy tales. Even the most seasoned travelers among them have never heard of a dragon subjugation in their lifetime, making the request seem like a death sentence. He listens as the receptionist and the Demon King discuss the merits of the quest. Gisela emphasizes that dragons are perfect training opponents and that the rewards for such a high-level task are substantial, drawing in many veteran adventurers. Considering the proposal, he muses that the venture might actually be worthwhile, admitting a personal curiosity to see a dragon in the flesh. Behind him, the conversation takes a bizarre turn as Gisela wonders aloud if dragon meat is tasty, much to Liisa's horror. Within the bustling guild hall, the young cleric questions the necessity of such a request, wondering why the army isn't simply mobilized if more manpower is required. He repeats the formal title of the mission, Joint Subjugation Request, as if weighing the weight of the words. He begins to explain the delicate political balance of the realm, noting that mobilizing a lord's army would inevitably be seen as a provocation by neighboring territories. Liisa listens, her expression shifting to one of realization as the complexities of the world are laid bare. Continuing his lecture, he points out that armies are primarily stationed to defend their own towns and rarely move unless there is a direct, immediate threat. Liisa is visibly impressed by his grasp of feudal politics, marveling at how much he seems to know about the ruling class. Her eyes widen in a sudden flash of realization, or perhaps a slip of the tongue. She quickly tries to backtrack, stammering that her knowledge was merely something she had overheard in passing. However, the dark-haired elf nearby speaks with a chillingly calm authority, cutting through the excuses. She reveals that her insight isn't from hearsay at all, but because the matter concerns her own home. A figure of imposing elegance sweeps into the room, his presence immediately commanding the space and drawing every eye toward him. He addresses the young cleric with a voice carrying a weight of cold authority, questioning her presence so far from her home and the guidance of her teacher. Looking directly at her, he utters her full name, Rise Montaigne, his gaze sharp and unyielding, framed by the strange dark markings upon his cheek that hint at his magical prowess. This revelation leaves the young junk collector reeling as the truth of her lineage is laid bare. She is no mere traveler, but the daughter of the noble house that rules these lands, destined to be the next court magician. Stunned by the weight of this secret, he can only ask why she kept such a significant part of her life hidden from them during their journey together. The newcomer continues his cold assessment, noting that even the high-ranking Hirotaka seems to be mocking her for associating with those beneath her station, while the elven woman nearby watches the exchange with growing discomfort. He is revealed to be the Grey Sage, Ashen Glow, a master of all magics and the current court magician of the Montaigne family, a title that sends a shiver of dread through the guild's receptionist. She trembles in the background, overwhelmed by the suffocating aura of power and wishing she had never let this situation escalate to such a dangerous level. With a deliberate, heavy step, the sage closes the distance, noting with a chilling calm how close his quarry had been all along. Looming over the trembling girl, he reaches out a gloved hand and delivers a final, non-negotiable command. She is to return to the family estate immediately. He is met with immediate resistance as Kenichi's hand clamps down on his arm, the young man's eyes burning with defiance as he demands an end to the use of force against Liisa. Looking down with icy indifference, the sage dismisses the intervention as a private Montaigne family affair, warning the strangers to remain uninvolved before coldly questioning their identity. They refuse to back down, with Kenichi stepping forward to proclaim their bond as Lisa's companions and fellow members of the Galactors, insisting they will not stand by while she is taken against her will. Rachel adds her own sharp critique, mocking the man's sickly, pale appearance and demanding to be heard, her frustration bubbling over as she confronts the intruder's arrogance. His gaze remains fixed and unreadable, a silent precursor to the power he is about to unleash as the tension in the room reaches a breaking point. With a single whispered command, he binds them all in shimmering chains of magical energy, leaving Kenichi and the others paralyzed and struggling in vain against the weight of the restraint. As he strides past his captive audience, Liisa cries out in distress for her friends, her voice trembling as she watches them rendered helpless by her former mentor's overwhelming magic. He looms over the trembling girl, posing a rhetorical question about why a noble of her standing would be found in such a lowly place, ignoring her desperate pleas for him to stop. The truth is delivered with a cold, clinical finality. She is a runaway, a fugitive from the heavy responsibilities that her noble lineage demands. This burden was established long ago, when a younger Liisa stood before the gates of her future, destined by her rare talent to serve as the next court magician of the Montaigne family. She had always been a diligent child, her serious nature making her life as a Montaigne daughter appear to progress smoothly as she mastered her early studies and magical training. However, this trajectory shifted dramatically when she reached the age of 10, the year designated for a public showcase of her burgeoning magical prowess. As the young girl stood before the crowd, the weight of their collective gaze felt suffocating, their whispers of high expectations and anticipation echoing like a physical pressure against her. Under the intense scrutiny of so many onlookers, the delicate threads of her control snapped, and her magic surged forth in a violent, unintended outburst that left the hall in ruins. The trauma of that failure manifested as a crippling stage fright, leading to a cycle of repeated magical mishaps that eventually drove her to flee her home, a choice her former teacher now uses to question her regard for her father's feelings. Overwhelmed by the weight of these memories and the cold accusations, she can only offer a tearful apology to the man who once taught her, her voice trembling with regret. Turning her gaze toward her current companions, she confesses the truth of her past, labeling herself a hopeless coward who abandoned her responsibilities because she was far from a useful person they believed her to be. The young woman continues her tearful admission, apologizing for the deception she maintained throughout their journey together. Hearing this, the young man beside her lets out a heavy sigh, frustrated by the realization of how little he truly knows about those he travels with and the depth of the suffering they carry. He looks at her with a soft, understanding expression, gently noting that while staying might have been her duty, the act of running away must have carried its own immense burden of pain. He watches in silence as the tall man offers a chilling compliment to the trembling girl, acknowledging her efforts with a cold, hollow praise that only deepens her shock. Ashen Glow remains unmoved by her distress, his gaze fixed forward as he prepares to enact his next move, while Lisa's eyes widen in a realization of impending loss. Suddenly, a brilliant light erupts from the floor, forming a complex geometric seal beneath them. With a heavy thud of his foot, the man initiates a teleportation spell to whisk them away. Nearby, the dark-haired woman feels the shift in the air, recognizing the unnatural signature of spatial magic, and realizing with growing alarm that the girl is being forcibly relocated. The young scavenger strains against an invisible force, his teeth gritted in a desperate attempt to move, but the tall man dismisses his efforts as utterly futile. He continues his mockery, asserting that no mere adventurer from such a lowly guild could ever hope to shatter his restraints, while the boy's fury reaches a boiling point. However, the man's composure falters for the first time as a sharp, metallic snap echoes through the room, signaling a fracture in his supposedly unbreakable binding. Stunned by the impossible sight of his spell cracking, he tries to justify his actions, insisting that the girl's return to her noble house is a matter of paramount duty that outweighs any personal bonds. Hearing this, the boy reflects on the moment she reached out to him, remembering how she was the very first person to offer him companionship when he was a nameless outcast with no place to call home. With a defiant roar, he counters the man's cold logic, declaring that her true duty lies in staying with those who truly value her, with him and the rest of their group. Ashen Glow's eyes widen in disbelief as the intricate magical circles of his binding spell shatter into jagged shards of light. Seizing the moment of the spell's collapse, Kenichi lunges forward, pulling Liisa into a protective embrace as the last remnants of the magical chains dissipate around them. He stares in stunned silence, his mind racing to comprehend how a mere human could not only shatter high-level binding magic, but emerge from the ordeal without a single scratch on his body. Standing firm, the young man addresses the mage, his voice steady despite the lingering tension in the air, while Liisa looks up at him with a mixture of awe and relief. He quickly checks on her well-being, apologizing for his reckless intervention before noting that his own physical resilience is far from ordinary, having withstood the magical pressure with ease. Turning his attention back to the situation at hand, he makes it clear that while the mage may have plans for her, he is yet to hear what Liisa herself truly feels about the matter. In response to his words, she takes a hesitant but determined step forward, her gaze shifting from her protector to the man who was once her mentor. She stands tall before the gray sage, the quiet room amplifying the weight of the choice she is about to voice. With a trembling but clear voice, she addresses her teacher, acknowledging everything he taught her, but firmly stating her desire to remain with her new companions and forge her own destiny as a magician here. The mage can only watch in silence, struck by the sudden and powerful manifestation of her own independent will, a spark he hadn't seen in her until this very moment. He watched as Lisa's voice trembled, her head bowed in a moment of deep-seated guilt. She stammered about her past deceptions, questioning if she truly deserved to speak so boldly after everything that had transpired between them and the guild. Interrupting the heavy silence, the dark-haired woman, known as Rachel, offered a blunt perspective. She admitted to her own past transgressions, reminding them that she had once attacked them despite being in their debt, yet she found their unwavering honesty and refreshing nature to be quite likable. She watched as Kenichi stepped forward, his hands on his hips and a bright, carefree expression on his face. With absolute certainty, he dismissed Lisa's worries, declaring that everything was perfectly fine and there was no need for her to dwell on the past or feel indebted. His words left Liisa wide-eyed with surprise, while Rachel looked on with a knowing, almost amused smirk. Kenichi simply continued to beam, his optimism acting as a shield against the lingering tension in the room. The dark-haired magician then shifted the conversation toward Lisa's potential, noting that her success rate was improving and that her training here was yielding results. She even casually inquired about how much longer Liisa intended to keep herself under such strain, given the progress she had made. She went on to praise the exceptional quality of Lisa's healing magic, pointing out that it did more than just close wounds. It possessed a purity that even improved the condition of the skin. It was a testament to a level of skill that far exceeded ordinary expectations for a cleric of her age. Striking a dramatic pose, Rachel declared herself a genius of the mystic arts, leaving no room for doubt about her own prowess. However, even the stoic Ashen Glow had to concede, admitting quietly that he knew better than anyone just how wonderful a magician Liisa truly was, despite his previous harshness. He then revealed the source of her incredible potential, the blessing of chakra. This revelation sent a shock through Rachel, while Ashen Glow explained that anyone touched by such a divine gift could never truly lack talent, as the very quality of their holy magic was inherently exceptional. Because of this rare gift, he maintained that his sole mission had been to nurture that talent and mold her into a prestigious court magician. Kenichi listened intently, his expression hardening as he realized the weight of the expectations that had been placed upon Lisa's shoulders by her former mentor. Standing tall in his white robes, the mage issued a final challenge to the group. If they truly believed that staying with them was the best path for Liisa to reach her full potential, then they would have to prove it through their actions and the results of her growth. He brings up the topic of the dragon subjugation they were discussing earlier, catching the group off guard with the sudden shift in conversation. Because of the high stakes involved in her growth, he demands that they successfully claim the dragon's head as undeniable proof of their capability. Continuing his ultimatum, he warns that if they fail the mission or if another party of adventurers beats them to the kill, Liisa will be forced to return home as originally planned. He further explains that he cannot leave her in the care of a group unable to overcome such a hurdle, though he acknowledges that if she can master her latent power, the task should not be impossible. In response to the daunting challenge, the young cleric's face flushes with a mix of shock and resolve as her companions loudly and defiantly declare their acceptance of the mission. The sage observes their sudden burst of confidence with a cool, questioning gaze, while the trio stands united and firm before him. Satisfied for the moment by their display of spirit, he turns his back on them and begins to depart the room. As he walks away, he promises to manage matters with her family in the interim and return once the subjugation is complete, prompting her to call out to him with a title of deep respect. Overwhelmed with emotion, she expresses her heartfelt gratitude for the opportunity, tearfully apologizing for her perceived shortcomings as his pupil. He offers one final, unreadable glance over his shoulder before disappearing, leaving the group to face the weight of their daunting new objective. He had set the terms, and Kenichi met them with a confident grin, acknowledging that they had no choice but to see the task through. The dark-haired elf beside him was just as ready, her arms practically itching for the fray, though Kenichi couldn't help but tease her when her stomach let out a loud, hungry growl. She, however, was not the only one feeling the weight of the challenge. Liisa stared forward with an intensity that bordered on desperation, realizing that this hunt was her only chance to master the blessing of chakra and finally gain the strength she needed. Their shared resolve culminated in a thunderous, synchronized shout that rattled the interior of the building, as they all committed themselves to bringing back the dragon's head. This collective roar of defiance burst forth from the structure, echoing through the air as a clear signal that their hunt had officially begun. While the group prepared, a different presence stirred in a nearby room, where discarded clothes and shoes lay in a messy heap on the floor. She peered out from the window with a sharp, knowing smirk, finding the sudden escalation of events far more entertaining than the boring story she had initially expected. Far away, in the desolate reaches of the mountains, a massive, reptilian eye snapped open, its golden iris and vertical pupil radiating an ancient, predatory power. The beast, a colossal dragon with dark, feathered wings and a body armored in thick scales, took flight, casting a long shadow over the jagged peaks below. Meanwhile, at the guild, the architect of this trial stood before a bounty board, his hand indicating the dragon's subjugation notice as he addressed a new group of listeners. He watched as Hirotaka and his party reacted with pure astonishment, their voices echoing through the hall as they struggled to comprehend the danger of the task he was assigning. He had set the stage, leaving the high-ranking party to contemplate their new objective. Standing before a quest board, the group examined the details of the dragon hunt. The large man complained about the distance, dreading the long journey ahead, while the blonde warrior dismissed the threat entirely, likening the legendary beast to nothing more than an oversized lizard. His arrogance quickly sparked friction within the ranks. When the swordsman looked down on his companions, the brawny warrior shot back, pointing out that they had all enjoyed lives of luxury and questioning his sudden attitude. The blonde leader's gaze sharpened with cold menace as he issued a blunt ultimatum, asking if the man had further complaints or if he preferred to be expelled from the party on the spot. He stood tall above the others, fueled by a deep-seated conviction that transcended his current surroundings. In his mind, there was no room for mediocrity. Whether in this world or any other, he was determined to prove his absolute superiority. He refused to accept the fate of a commoner or a background figure, vowing to make everyone acknowledge his rightful place at the pinnacle. Yet, beneath his outward confidence, a bitter resentment simmered. His thoughts turned to the mysterious individual who had claimed the glory of slaying the Demon King, an act that had tarnished his own reputation. He narrowed his eyes, the identity of this unknown rival remaining a frustrating enigma that he was desperate to solve. The day of the dragon extermination has finally arrived, and the designated meeting place is a vast, snow-covered mountain range. In response to the call for the hunt, a massive crowd of warriors has gathered in the valley, where Kenichi takes in the crisp mountain air and notes the sheer number of formidable adventurers present. He turns to the small, hooded figure floating beside him, questioning why she decided to join this dangerous excursion. She simply replies that dragons are a rare sight, and she couldn't pass up the opportunity to see one for herself. While they discuss their reasons for being there, a group of boisterous men nearby begins to jeer, their attention fixed on a newcomer they mockingly refer to as a decorative hero. As the tension rises among the rowdy group, the elven woman watches from a safe distance, advising her companions to stay clear of the hot-tempered crowd, while Kenichi looks on with a mix of curiosity and concern. His attention is suddenly piqued when a cold voice cuts through the noise, dismissively labeling the rowdy group as noisy deadweight. Because of this blatant provocation, the large man known as Edgar whirls around, his face contorted with rage as he demands to know who dared to call them such a thing. Enraged by the calm, insulting gaze of the man before him, the brute draws his weapon and threatens to kill him, but his opponent merely scoffs at his lack of intelligence. With a roar of fury, the brute lunges forward, but his heavy blade is met with a swift and effortless parry that stops his momentum cold. Stunned by the effortless defense, the brute can only stare as the warrior looks down with eyes devoid of warmth, warning that he has no patience for incompetence and will not hesitate to make anyone who gets in his way disappear. He stands impassively as the surrounding adventurers hurl insults, accusing him of cowardice and opportunism. They mock his supposed heroism, claiming he did nothing when the Demon King truly threatened the world. Turning his back on the jeering crowd, the swordsman dismisses the encounter as a pointless waste of time, leading his small band away from the center of the camp. From a distance, Kenichi watches the group depart, reflecting on how their reputation has plummeted while their arrogant attitudes remain entirely unchanged. Within the privacy of their own circle, one of the companions voices their frustration, suggesting they simply abandon the mission since they are clearly unwelcome. Hirotaka sharply rebukes the suggestion, pointing out that it is precisely this lack of resolve that causes others to view them with such blatant contempt. This criticism sparks a sudden flare of aggression from a dark-haired man in the group, who lunges forward to seize Hirotaka by the collar, his patience finally snapping. He snarls his indifference, complaining bitterly about being dragged to a remote, unknown location and forced into a mission simply because of their perceived talents. Unfazed by the physical threat, the leader stares back with cold, calculating eyes, reminding his disgruntled ally that this specific quest promises a reward far greater than any minor job they have ever undertaken. The tension of the exchange is palpable even to those watching from afar, as Kenichi and his new allies observe the fractured group from the edge of the clearing. He quietly reveals the truth to Liisa and the elven woman, identifying the bickering warriors as the very companions who once cast him out, though he admits his own past weakness made their decision inevitable. He stands with his new allies, their spirits lifted by the realization of his unique defensive capabilities. Liisa and the Elven woman acknowledge his attack nullification as a formidable asset, one that places him on equal footing with the elite adventurers they are about to face. Nearby, the air is thick with the whispers of Hirotaka's entourage, who trade rumors about the man they once discarded. They speak of Hirotaka's supposed triumph over the Demon King, contrasting his glory with the useless junk collector they believe Kenichi still to be. Hearing the chatter, the golden-haired warrior scoffs, his arrogance unyielding as he calls out for his prey to reveal itself. He refuses to believe that a man with such a garbage skill could ever be a threat, his focus solely on the glory of the hunt. Suddenly, the sun is swallowed by a gargantuan shadow, plunging the mountainside into an unnatural twilight. The gathered adventurers cry out in alarm as the very atmosphere shifts, heralding the arrival of the beast they sought. Perched atop the jagged peaks, the dragon reveals its true, terrifying scale, its scales shimmering like dark obsidian against the dimming sky. It is a creature of ancient malice, far more imposing than any of them had anticipated. High above the chaos, Rachel descends on a localized gale, her laughter echoing as she commands the winds. She calls out to the beast, her presence confirming that this encounter is no mere coincidence of nature. Below, the warrior stares upward, his composure finally fracturing as he realizes the magnitude of the threat. The sight of the woman and the beast together leaves him momentarily paralyzed by the sheer scale of the unfolding disaster. Breaking the collective stupor, the young man with the rusted blade lunges forward, his eyes locked on the dragon's head. His sudden, aggressive movement catches his former leader completely off guard, a blur of motion against the backdrop of the monster. As he nears the creature's maw, the dragon's throat begins to glow with a lethal, concentrated energy. He readies his sentient weapon, calling upon its power to shatter the incoming magical assault before it can be unleashed. The beast exhales a devastating torrent of light, a beam of pure destruction that carves through the air. The battle for the mountain has begun in earnest, with the first strike threatening to incinerate everything in its path. He recoils in pain, his body aching from the impact of the blast. He stares at his blade in disbelief, wondering why his mana break failed to nullify the assault. Nearby, Hirotaka lies sprawled on the ground, his companions crying out in alarm as the situation spirals out of control. Because the searing heat was not born of sorcery, the anti-magic strike was useless. High above, the small, cloaked figure of Rachel mocks his confusion, explaining that the flames were purely physical in nature. He can only look up in shock as the realization of his vulnerability sinks in. As the smoke clears, he senses another presence and shouts a warning for everyone to stay on guard. A massive, horned silhouette begins to emerge from the haze, accompanied by a low, rumbling laughter that vibrates through the air. The newcomer steps forward, a towering man with wild, flowing hair and formidable horns. Rachel greets him with a casual familiarity, while he looks down at the scene with a predatory grin. He has finally tracked down his target, much to the bewilderment of the young warrior standing before him. He immediately begins to berate the small girl, his voice a thunderous roar as he complains about the difficulty of finding her. He looms over the area, his massive frame and sharp teeth emphasizing his terrifying power as he calls her a bastard for making him search so long. In response, she simply covers her ears, dismissively telling him he is far too loud and large. They bicker like old acquaintances, the giant insisting that men should be as imposing as possible while she remains unimpressed by his sheer scale. Turning her attention back to the trembling boy, she asks with a smirk if he has finally put the pieces together. He remains silent, sweat beading on his forehead as he tries to process the overwhelming pressure radiating from the two beings. This imposing figure is none other than Tristan, the Demon King of Wrath. He stands with arms crossed, his muscular physique and dark, ornate collar marking him as a ruler of the demonic realm, a being of pure, unbridled fury. The revelation sends a wave of terror through the gathered adventurers, their whispers filled with dread. He can hardly believe the harsh joke reality has played on them, realizing that they are now facing two of the world's most dangerous entities simultaneously. Meanwhile, Hirotaka watches from the sidelines, a dark ambition flickering in his eyes. He reasons that if the dragon's true form is indeed a demon king, then slaying such a creature would grant him unparalleled status, and he begins to plot his next move despite the obvious danger. He stands frozen, sweat beading on his brow as the overwhelming presence of the Demon King of Wrath fills the air. Tristan's gaze is fixed elsewhere, his expression one of cold, focused intensity that ignores the lesser warriors around him. Turning his attention to the woman he calls Gisela, the Demon King demands to know if the magic sword has been recovered yet. She simply points toward the young junk collector, identifying him as the current wielder. Tristan's response is immediate and ruthless, ordering her to hurry up, eliminate the boy, and reclaim the blade without further delay. Instead of obeying, she clings tightly to the boy, her voice steady as she defies the ancient law. She declares her intention to pass the sword to him permanently, announcing her resignation from the mantle of Demon King. The boy can only stammer in confusion, caught between her sudden affection and the looming threat of the monster before them. This blatant act of rebellion leaves the Demon King of Wrath momentarily speechless, his features contorted in a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. Behind him, the unlikely pair remains locked in their strange embrace, the gravity of her words hanging heavy in the air as the world seems to hold its breath. His shock quickly curdles into a dark, simmering rage as he clenches his clawed hand, asserting that one does not simply walk away from such title. He admits that her slothful nature was once a testament to a demon king's absolute freedom, but his tone shifts to a lethal promise of execution. Sensing the sudden spike in murderous intent, the boy shouts a desperate warning for everyone to take cover immediately. The very ground begins to groan and fracture as a violent surge of dark energy erupts from the Demon King's position, swirling outward in a lethal vortex. Standing at the epicenter of the growing cataclysm, he becomes a silhouette of pure destruction, the atmosphere around him warping under the weight of his unleashed power. With a single, piercing eye fixed on his targets, he speaks a final, cold command that seals their fate. Perish. A blinding flash of white light consumes the landscape, an explosion of such magnitude that it threatens to erase everything in its path. The shockwave tears through the earth, sending jagged shards of rock and debris flying into the air as the world itself seems to shatter under the Demon King's wrath. The young scavenger gasps for air, his eyes wide with the shock of the sudden silence following the cataclysmic blast. Surveying the devastation, he finds himself in the center of a scorched wasteland where the forest once stood, the air still thick with dust and heat. His heart leaps as he spots figures in the distance. They are alive, shielded by a lingering, ethereal glow that he recognizes as a protective barrier. He rushes toward them, finding the young cleric cradling the fallen Demon King of Sloth, her face etched with a mixture of terror and resolve as she realizes the cost of their safety. As the explosion loomed, Rachel had shielded the girl with her own body, channeling every ounce of her mana into a desperate defense and urging her to master the blessing of chakra, as she was the only one left who could protect them. She had offered a final, encouraging smile, assuring the young cleric that she possessed the strength to do what was necessary. The young man stands amidst the ruins, watching as the dying woman pleads for the girl to save the unconscious Hirotaka, her voice a mere whisper against the wind. He remains there, his relief at their survival warring with a deep sense of failure. Though he is grateful they are alive, the weight of his own helplessness during the crisis hangs heavy upon his heart. Kenichi quickly outlines a plan, tasking his companion with the vital roles of healing and protection while he prepares to face the looming threat. She nods in firm agreement, her expression a mix of resolve and trust as they commit to their desperate gambit. She suddenly appears, hovering above them with a mocking smile that chills the air. The dark-haired demon questions the audacity of mere humans attempting to challenge a true sovereign, warning that once Tristan's rage is ignited, he will not cease until everything in his path is reduced to ash. He can only stare in shock as the gravity of her words sinks in. She continues her taunt, leaning closer to suggest that victory is an impossibility unless he is willing to cast aside his humanity and become a demon king himself. The atmosphere suddenly thickens as a monstrous presence manifests directly behind the boy. The sheer, suffocating pressure of the Demon King's arrival freezes him in his tracks, his eyes wide, with a primal terror he has never known. He is given no time to react before a devastating blow sends him reeling. The Titan sneers at the pathetic display of resistance, his voice dripping with contempt as he dismisses the boy's efforts as utterly weak. The onslaught that follows is a blur of overwhelming violence, leaving no room for escape or counterattack. With every bone-shattering impact, the monster bellows his disdain, repeatedly branding the young warrior as weak while he is systematically dismantled by a power far beyond his comprehension. As he lies broken and gasping on the ground, the harsh reality of their situation finally takes hold. He stares blankly into the distance, the crushing realization dawning that the gap between them is an abyss he cannot hope to cross. The Titan stands triumphant amidst the wreckage, his presence casting a long, dark shadow over the fallen. He sneers at the small fry, who dared to believe they could change their fate, dismissing them as mere trash beneath his notice while the cleric watches helplessly from the sidelines. She gasps, her eyes wide with terror, as the monster's predatory grin looms large. The sheer malice radiating from his bared teeth signals a gruesome end for anyone left standing. Seeing his friend's distress, the young man cries out her name in a final, desperate plea. It is then that the dark-haired woman leans in, her voice a seductive whisper amidst the chaos, offering him a choice: to forge a contract with her and seize the strength required to survive. He stares in disbelief as the young cleric turns away, her silhouette small against the looming threat. As the Demon King of Wrath sneers at their insignificance, she finds her voice, recalling a memory of when they first met. She remembers being told that her genuine feelings held more power than any simple healing spell. Tears stream down her face, yet a radiant smile breaks through her sorrow. She confesses her deep love for the kindness he has always shown her. The thought of losing that essence is unbearable. She realizes that if he were to strike a deal with the cursed blade and ascend as a demon king, the man she loves would vanish forever. Turning her gaze toward him, she issues a desperate ultimatum, vowing to harbor resentment if he chooses that dark path. Nearby, the demon king of sloth watches the unfolding drama with a look of mild annoyance at the interruption. Tristan scoffs at their emotional display, dismissing it as a pathetic waste of time. He raises a hand, coldly commanding them to perish in their own weakness. A cataclysmic force erupts, tearing through the battlefield and sending shockwaves that threaten to consume everything in their path. In the face of certain annihilation, she lets out a defiant cry, channeling every ounce of her will into a single, desperate plea for safety. A frantic symphony of magic follows, as barriers of light and surges of mending energy clash against the overwhelming darkness. Within the chaos, the encouraging words of her mentor echo in her mind, fueling her resolve. She refuses to believe she is untalented, pouring her entire soul into a relentless barrage of protective charms and healing light. She stares wide-eyed, the weight of the moment finally sinking in as she confronts the truth of her own existence. Standing amidst the rubble of her shattered expectations, the young cleric admits to herself that she always sensed a dormant, absolute power lurking within her soul. This realization is tinged with regret. She confesses to having been terrified of this strength for so long, apologizing for her past cowardice and her tendency to look away from the truth. Reaching out to the core of her being, she embraces the manifestation of her latent potential, desperately pleading for it to lend her the strength needed to save those she cares for. In response to her plea, a blinding pillar of pure, white light erupts, consuming the darkness of the battlefield. The sudden radiance leaves Kenichi speechless, wondering if he is witnessing the descent of a deity, while even the demon kings Tristan and Rachel are forced to shield their eyes from the overwhelming aura. From within the brilliance, a colossal, ethereal figure of a goddess manifests, her serene presence dwarfing the small cleric who summoned her. With a mystical sigil igniting within her iris, the girl offers a final, desperate prayer to the merciful Holy Mother Chakra-sama, begging for the protection of everyone present. The divine entity extends a graceful hand, its touch lifting Kenichi and the others from the scorched earth as the destructive energy of the Demon King is held at bay. Cradling the group within a shimmering sphere of celestial light, the goddess provides a sanctuary against the chaos, her silent vigil marking a turning point in the desperate struggle. She has manifested through a mortal, a sight that leaves the Demon King of Wrath trembling with disbelief. He stares at the divine presence, his voice a low growl as he struggles to comprehend how a mere human could serve as a vessel for such a manifestation. The name of the goddess, Chakra, escapes his lips like a curse, his previous arrogance replaced by a cold, creeping realization of the power now standing against him. While he reels from the shock, the young cleric clasps her hands tightly against her chest, her heart pouring out a desperate prayer. She begs the Holy Mother to let her plea reach her, asking for just a fraction more strength to protect those behind her. Nearby, the young junk collector can only watch in stunned silence, his eyes wide as he witnesses the impossible miracle unfolding before him, the sheer scale of the goddess's aura dwarfing everything else. Her prayer is answered with a surge of energy that catches the attention of the other Demon King, who stares upward in genuine shock. The Demon King of Sloth realizes that this isn't just a defensive barrier. It is a power capable of completely neutralizing the devastating force Tristan had unleashed. Her eyes, devoid of their usual lethargy, fixate on the radiant figure, acknowledging the arrival of a force that has fundamentally shifted the balance of the battlefield. She is not the only one stunned, as a thunderous vibration shakes the very air and the goddess's presence fully solidifies, her eyes remaining closed in a mask of serene but absolute authority. The sheer pressure of the manifestation forces the Demon Kings to recoil, their faces contorted in a mix of sweat-drenched fear and disbelief. Even the young warrior is overwhelmed by the sensory assault, his features twisted into a comical mask of terror as the world around them is swallowed by the holy resonance of Chakra's descent. The Demon King of Wrath lets out a guttural roar of defiance, his face contorted in a mask of pure rage. Beside him, the ethereal goddess Chakra remains impassive, her eyes glowing with a cold, divine light, while Liisa watches the unfolding confrontation with wide-eyed terror. Suddenly, the colossal goddess reaches out, pulling him into a firm, inescapable embrace. He thrashes against her divine strength, his fury momentarily replaced by a flicker of genuine shock as the light of her presence surrounds him. From a distance, Kenichi watches the scene with bated breath, his voice barely a whisper as he calls out for Liisa. Meanwhile, he continues to grunt in frustration, unable to break free from the goddess's grasp. He snarls, calling her a mad when he tries to push her away, his hands pressing against her luminous form. The goddess does not flinch, her expression remaining serene even as the demon's hatred boils over. With a violent surge of power, he finally tears himself away, his voice booming across the battlefield. He demands to know how anyone could dare speak so arrogantly in the presence of the Demon King of Wrath, his eyes burning with a renewed, lethal intensity. He raises his hands, dark energy crackling and glinting between his fingers as he prepares a devastating counterattack. He warns his opponents not to get cocky, his teeth bared in a predatory grin. The demon unleashes a massive torrent of energy, the ground shaking beneath the force of his wrath. Liisa winces, shielding her eyes from the blinding light, but the attack is met by the shimmering barrier of Chakra's manifestation, which holds firm against the onslaught. His attack fails to leave a mark, prompting her to breathe a sigh of relief as she explains that the goddess is a deity of absolute protection. The Demon King merely scowls, his expression shifting from rage to a cold, simmering annoyance. She looks at him with confusion, wondering why he isn't more frustrated by the stalemate. She is met with a cold explanation as he counters, stating that the use of divine manifestation is a technique that carries immeasurable consequences. He looks down at her with disdain, claiming that her lack of understanding is a sign of her own shallowness. Liisa is gasping for air, her body trembling from the strain of the battle. Kenichi watches in disbelief as she forces herself to stand, her voice raspy as she questions his recklessness, asking if he is trying to get himself killed. She narrows her eyes, focusing every ounce of her remaining strength. Her mind races with a desperate plan. She must endure the onslaught until Hirotaka can find a weakness, banking on the hope that their foe will eventually exhaust his mana by using such massive techniques. However, the Demon King of Wrath merely chuckles at her assumption, his dark silhouette looming over the battlefield. He mockingly asks when he ever suggested his power was limited to simple magic. He continues his taunt, explaining that his hellfire is fueled by both mana and his own life force, allowing him to burn with an eternal, unquenchable intensity. The revelation that he can create flames from his very body fluids leaves her paralyzed with dread. A dark incantation begins to resonate through the air, calling upon the flame god Gera to consume everything in its path. The words promise annihilation, fueled by a sacrifice of life and spirit. High above, a terrifying sphere of concentrated darkness and flame, a cosmic meteor, begins to form. The Demon King boasts that this single strike possesses enough destructive power to erase an entire mountain from existence. As the pressure of the impending doom weighs down on her, she tries to call out to her goddess, but the words catch in her throat. Kenichi senses her fading strength and realizes the time for hesitation has passed. He suddenly lunges forward, his rusted blade glowing with a sudden, sharp intensity. With a desperate cry of mana break, he strikes at the heart of the descending magical mass, betting everything on the hope that his unique power can unravel the spell. His eyes burn with a fierce, unwavering resolve as he makes contact. Across the field, the Demon King's expression of triumph falters, replaced by a flicker of genuine shock. The young warrior stands his ground, the dark energy dissipating around him. The ancient demon stares in disbelief, unable to comprehend how a mere human could wield such a cursed blade with such mastery. He stands protectively near Liisa, warning her to stay back as the Demon King reacts with sudden interest to the name of his former rival. His confusion only grows when the adversary asks how he knows of Japan, noting the familiar Japanese ring of the name Hirotaka. The youth is met with a booming laugh from the Demon King, who reveals the shocking truth. He too was once Japanese, arriving in this world over a century ago and finding it a surprise to meet a compatriot in such a place. He continues to mock the boy's surprise, asking if he can appreciate the charm of the weapon he is about to manifest, a relic from their shared homeland. The monster's words cause the boy to watch in sheer terror as the Demon King reaches into his own essence, the air filled with a sickening, grinding sound. His breath hitches as a familiar hilt begins to emerge from the dark energy. A blade the Demon King boasts is truly magnificent. The boy's gaze remains fixed as the Demon King stands fully revealed, brandishing a massive, curved katana he identifies as the Magic Sword Legion. He brandishes the blade with a predatory grin, looking down at the boy who admits that despite the weapon's fame, he has never actually seen a real katana in person. The warrior's presence looms as the boy explains that he comes from a modern Japan, an era long after the age of swords and shogunates has passed, making the sight of such a weapon even more surreal. His explanation is dismissed as the Demon King begins his advance, eager to prove which of their magical blades is truly the strongest in this world. He grins with predatory delight, proposing a duel between fellow countrymen to settle which blade is superior, his massive Magic Sword Legion or the boy's rusted Osoro. Nearby, the blonde warrior watches the confrontation with a grimace, realizing that he and his companion are the only survivors of the initial onslaught. He stares in disbelief, his pupils shrinking as he witnesses a power that defies his understanding, even as his comrade pleads for them to flee while they still can. The suggestion of retreat tastes like ash in his mouth. He hasn't yet justified his place in this world, and the thought of running now feels like a total erasure of his worth. As the young junk collector begins to walk toward the certain death of the Demon King, the warrior can only offer a hollow dismissal, telling him to do as he pleases. Deep down, a bitter resentment festers. He once believed his arrival in this land was a divine selection, a proof of his value. Yet now he feels utterly invisible in the shadow of this duel. Suddenly, the air screams as steel meets steel, the Demon King's massive blade crashing against the boy's rusted weapon with bone-shaking force. The Dark Lord presses the advantage without mercy, his laughter echoing over the boy's pained cries as the sheer weight of the Legion threatens to crush him. Just as the killing blow descends, The blonde warrior lunges forward, his own blade ringing out as he intercepts the strike to stand between the boy and his executioner. This unexpected defiance leaves the young scavenger wide-eyed with shock, while the warrior's gaze hardens with a newfound, desperate resolve. He demands attention, his eyes wide with a disturbing intensity that borders on madness. He notes the success of his nullification skill, while Kenichi, relieved to see him safe, suggests they join forces against the common threat. Instead of cooperating, he suddenly lashes out, his blade swinging with a force that catches Kenichi completely off guard. The swordsman stands tall, looking down with disdain as he questions why someone as incompetent as Kenichi would even attempt to face the Demon King. He then makes his true intentions clear, demanding the magic sword and admitting he found Kenichi's recent success suspicious. Believing himself superior, he argues that a weapon of such caliber belongs in the hands of someone truly excellent, dismissing Kenichi's efforts as mere luck granted by the blade. This arrogance stems from a deep-seated conviction that he was the one chosen by the world, a belief that has fueled his ego since the beginning. He recalls his life before this world, a time when he felt his inherent value and power set him apart from others like Kenichi. The thought of an inferior person wielding power that isn't rightfully theirs fills him with a bitter, teeth-gritting resentment. He lunges forward in a fit of rage, ignoring Kenichi's desperate pleas for cooperation and lashing out at what he perceives as an insulting, relaxed attitude. He sneered, his voice dripping with disdain as he condemned the interference in what he considered a sacred duel between men. To him, the interruption was the act of an ignorant fool who failed to grasp the weight of the moment. He stood tall, his presence radiating a newfound malice that caught the young scavenger completely off guard, leaving him frozen in disbelief. Because of his mounting aggression, the cleric desperately called upon the goddess Chakra, her voice trembling as she realized the situation had spiraled beyond their control. Beside her, the youth gritted his teeth, the weight of the impending disaster settling heavily in his gut. As she prayed, a colossal arc of dark energy tore through the sky, dwarfing even the divine presence of the goddess as it descended with lethal intent. The impact of this strike shattered the landscape, sending shockwaves through the earth that mirrored the terror etched across the girl's face. Following the initial blast, the ground itself was cleaved apart with a deafening roar, the jagged peaks of the surrounding mountains crumbling under the weight of the unnatural power. Amidst the settling dust, the swordsman gripped his blade with white-knuckled intensity, his very aura radiating a primal, unchecked fury. Seeing her fall, the boy cried out for his companion as she collapsed, her small form disappearing into the dust and debris of the shattered battlefield. He scrambled to her side, his heart racing until he confirmed she was merely unconscious, a wave of relief washing over him despite the chaos. While checking on her, he listened as his former ally boasted that his blade, Legion, possessed the power to sever anything, be it divine protection or the most advanced nullification skills, once its rage was ignited. Hirotaka lies broken on the ground, blood staining his lips as he gasps for air. Above him, Kenichi stands firm, the weight of the duel's end hanging in the air. He looks down at his defeated opponent, his expression unreadable, while Hirotaka can only stare back in a mixture of pain and disbelief. As a hand reaches toward him, the fallen warrior wonders if this is the final blow, the moment his life will be extinguished. The looming threat triggers a bitter memory of being cast aside and ridiculed by those who deemed him worthless, their voices echoing with the sting of being called incompetent. That deep-seated hatred for the weak resonates through his mind, just as a sudden, sharp sensation cuts through the tension. Instead of death, a surge of vitality washes over him, and he gasps as he realizes the wounds that should have been fatal are miraculously closing. The young man explains that he took a gamble, using a skill called Immortality Attribute Bestowal. It was a desperate measure, but the only way he knew to keep the other man from slipping away. Visibly shaken, he questions why he was spared, struggling to grasp the concept of a gift that mends only the most lethal of injuries. In response, he offers a simple, undeniable truth. He simply does not want to see him die. This blunt admission leaves him speechless, his wide eyes searching the face of the man he once considered an enemy. He watched in horror as a sudden, violent explosion rocked the battlefield, and a voice cried out Kenichi's name in desperation. Amidst the smoke, the Demon King loomed, his expression twisted in irritation as he complained about the persistence of his opponents during their match. He continued his verbal assault, labeling them as mistakes and garbage that only served to make others uncomfortable. Hearing these insults, the young man tightened his grip on his blade, his knuckles whitening as he told the tyrant to finally be quiet. He looked up with fire in his eyes, shouting that someone as self-centered as the Demon King had no right to judge the worth of others. In a flash of brutal violence, the Demon King struck, severing the boy's arm and leaving him staring in shock at the empty space where his limb had been. The monster loomed over his fallen foe, mocking the concept of living for others as a mere excuse used by losers to justify being exploited. Collapsed on the ground and bleeding heavily, he reflected on what he considered a miserable life, where the weak were constantly exploited by those around them. Yet, through the pain, a single thought surfaced. Despite everything, he had been saved. As he began to speak of the world he came from and the things he had lost, the Demon King could only stare in confusion, caught off guard by the boy's sudden resolve. He stands firm before the Demon King, declaring that despite the pain and the loss of his limb, he was never truly alone because of the bonds he forged with his companions. Tristan watches him, his gaze narrowing as he processes the boy's unexpected defiance and the strength of his conviction. Suddenly, a memory flashes through his mind, his eyes widening as the weight of a forgotten lesson from the Demon King of Sloth takes hold. The question of how to truly bind oneself to a magic sword echoes in the darkness of his consciousness, pulling him back to a conversation from the past. He remembers Rachel's voice, her grin widening as she explained the bloody price. One must drench the blade in their own life force and plead for the strength to change their fate. At the time, he had hesitated, preferring his simple, carefree life, yet he had wondered what he would sacrifice if those he cared for were ever in true peril. Now, broken and bleeding on the cold ground, he whispers an apology to Liisa and Rachel before making his choice, casting aside the kindness that failed to protect what was important. With a chilling laugh from the shadows, the contract is sealed, and a torrent of dark, malevolent energy surges through his mangled body to replace what was lost. He rises, no longer the boy he once was, but a figure of shadow and vengeance, his missing limb replaced by a claw of pure darkness clutching the demon's sword.